Tahoe Truckee Sanitation Agency for March 20th to order. Start with roll call.
Yes. Director Wilson. Director Cox.
Yes.
Director Wilkins.
Present.
Director Smelser.
Yes.
And Director Tresson.
Here. At this point, if we'd all stand, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. At this point, we'll open the meeting up for public comment. We obviously got a lot of folks here. I think I know why you're here, but if anybody has anything they want to address the board on an item that's not on the agenda, this is the time we would do that. So is anybody here interested in discussing something that's not on the agenda? Seeing nothing. Rochelle, did we receive any written comment or anybody online that's here to address something else?
No, sir.
Okay. Then we will close public comment and move to the consent agenda. Any of the board members interested in pulling anything from the consent agenda?
Recording in progress.
I'm going to have to rewind. We'll keep moving. Hearing nothing, any public comment on the consent agenda? Hearing nothing, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Moved by Wilkins, second by Wilson. No, any other comments? If not, we need to do roll call because of the virtual person.
We do.
So Rochelle, if you do roll call, please.
Director Wilson.
Yes.
Director Cox.
Yes.
Director Wilkins.
Yes.
Director Smelser.
Here.
Director Tresson.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Okay. Moving on to the regular agenda. Item 1 is discussion, review, ratification of financial statements. Liz, were you going to take that?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thought I'd just stretch my legs right now. Feeling kind of cramped sitting down. Well, good morning, members of the board, everyone that works at TTSA. I'm so excited you all came today to hear me talk about your financials. Just kidding. Well, for some of you, I may be a new face. For some of you, you see my face on Zoom, or you may have received an email from me. I'm Liz Cook. I'm a consultant from Boucher Law. Some of you may have worked with Jean, my boss. But I'm here to help the finance team, as you all have an open position that Boucher Law is recruiting for. I'm here, feet on the ground, to try to help support Michelle and the team, as well as provide some cash flow analysis upcoming as well. But today, we're here to talk about our financial statement. So, I'm still learning how this works. So I have my financial statements in front of me. You have them in your packets. Would you like me to start with a highlight? Or do we want to just talk about what's new in the packet, or any questions you have?
Thanks, Liz. I thought it might be good to highlight the red items so that the board understands what those are.
Sure.
And then really one of the main reasons I had this pulled out of the consent agenda item was the those trends, the reserve trends, and the kind of story they tell. I thought that was a worthwhile item to share with the board. And so I didn't want you to work through each of the different fund cash flow or financial statements line item by line item.
You don't want to hear every thought I have about these documents, huh? Fair point. Fair point. Okay, well, flipping through the packet, the first thing that may have come to your attention is that your income from service charges in Fund 10 is negative. Did that freak anyone else out besides me? Just me. Just me, huh? Well, here's the story behind that. The process is different this year than it had been in prior years. And in January, the direct billing was processed. When it was processed, it included all 6 months. Well, what you all have started to do at this agency is recognize that revenue from service charges as it's earned, meaning the service is provided, the revenue comes in. It is not tied to when you get your cash payments. Cash is separate. Does that make sense for this conversation? So the reason why this is red is a large amount was reversed because it was for 6 months. Then we put 2 months of the accrual back in. So it just nets to a negative amount. Your year-to-date total is positive. That's a great story. And you will not see this negative next month. The accruals will be done as appropriate. So that's the biggest story from Fund 10. Were there other questions from Fund 10? Let's take a look at Fund 2, the Wastewater Capital Reserve. So you may or may not have noticed something a little different on this presentation. We took out the connection fee refunds, line 2 under revenue. In the general ledger, those amounts net together. So it's not always a true presentation of income that came in from connection fees. So for the presentation of this report, we have taken that out and added the second line. So you could see that there was a refund, but you did also receive income this month. Any questions about Fund 2?
I'm just curious what led us to do refunds on connection fees. Usually connection fees are people who are expanding a building, adding, requiring additional demand on the treatment plant, and we charge connection fees for that.
Yeah, usually the refunds are cases where like a development doesn't go forward, so there's actually no connection.
So where they paid a fee but then didn't follow through on the
Correct.
project?
Yeah, they paid their upfront permit fee, didn't follow through, so we refund it back.
Okay.
Any additional questions? Let's take a look at Fund 6. You all worked on some projects and you spent some money. That's the biggest story to tell there. Let's move to the cash statement. So this statement shows your total cash balance, and then at the bottom it shows how it's allocated to the funds. You'll notice up on the top there's a new column for this month because of timing. Accounting is all about timing, right? When does it hit the general ledger? And cash is something that you can't accrue for. Cash is what it is. Those are accounting rules. So what happened this month is AP posted at the end of the month just as it should, but guess what? The next day of the month was a working day. So the transfer was in process. This does not mean that your bank account was ever negative because your checks were posted to the ledger in February, accounting speak, but they were not dated until 3/1, so no one could have actually cashed that check. So this is just showing you that there was an in-transfer payment and that you were not negative in your checking account. Any other questions on cash? Okay, let's take a look at the pretty charts, my favorite part. The general fund balance is what we're going to take a look at first. And to take a step back, I believe the request, you want to talk about the donut charts.
No, let's scroll, let's get to the,
Okay, let's not talk about the donut chart.
please.
Well, let's talk about this one. So it was my understanding the request was to see the fund balances over the last 3 years so that we could take a look at trends and see what's happening in the organization. It should not be new news to this organization that you receive cash 3 times a year from your teeter payments. There's also other cash that's in smaller amounts that come in the door, and that's what these line charts are showing you. You'll see there are a few accounting blips, so I'm going to ask you to hang in there with me for a minute and ignore some of the tiny down dips where they go down, up, down, particularly the yellow line. Some of those are accounting moves. But if you look overall, you start the fiscal year at a balance, you get a little bit of cash, it's your 5% that's coming in from the prior year. You spend your cash down through December. In January, you get more money, right? So your cash balances go up. You spend that money down again, and you get that other little blip up for cash at the end of the fiscal year in April-ish. And that's exactly what this fund chart is telling you. One thing about the ups and downs that I'm still researching and taking a look at, I think a lot of them are accounting moves. Those of you on Finance Committee may have a little bit more information than the rest of the board, meaning we talk about some of these accounting moves while we're in the Finance Committee. I'm trying to figure out what the most appropriate presentation or footnote is so that we can weed some of these questions out in the future. Does that make sense?
And Liz, this is for our general fund, our day-to-day operations,
Yes.
Operational needs, and
Yes.
we have a fund policy that says that where do we try and keep this fund? You can see green is 3 years ago, blue was last year, yellow is this year. We have this kind of increasing reserve levels, but what is our target that we're trying to maintain in this fund?
So I believe at the end of FY22, I could be wrong on the timing, but the most recent fund policy states that you'll have 60% of your general fund balance sitting here in the beginning of the year. that assures that you have money to continue to spend through December, so you get your cash payment in January.
Yeah. And so in our 60% of our annual operating fund is roughly that
I'm going to
somewhere in
defer
that,
to someone in accounting to throw a number
roughly in
out.
the $10 million range or so. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so 3 years ago when we didn't have that, you can see how the green line, by the time we got our teeter payment, we were pretty much had depleted all of our reserves in that fund, and that's not a good position to be in. And so we've tried to build that fund level up to make sure we have adequate reserves to run the day-to-day operations for 6 months without going negative in that fund.
And you can see as your fund policy changes, your beginning balances will go higher. Budget increases. I don't think I've been at any agency where we said we're going to have less budget this year than we did last year. So that beginning balance should always ratchet up as we add new lines for the trend for the upcoming fiscal year.
In the height of that increase in our reserves in that between December and January, it's the teeter payment, that's our property tax revenues, but mainly our service charges that the county collects for us. And yellow, the height of that increase is greater than what we saw in the green or the blue because we had done our rate study and implemented a increased rate. So
I also believe, and Michelle will correct me if I just make this up, you get your ad valorem money in January as well, and so that will raise your cash balances as well, and not tied to service charges. Any questions on the general fund balance or Fund 10 chart?
Let's take a look at Fund 6.
This is your project balance. This is where y'all are spending some money. Yeah, is that the one that you had? Yes. So again, same story. You start with the balance and you start to spend it down throughout the year. You'll notice that there's some steeper ups and downs in this, and I believe this is related to some accounting cleanup that was done in prior fiscal years that went back and adjusted a balance. Again, it adjusted a fund balance, meaning an allocation. It did not increase or decrease your total cash. You can't do that. So we're taking a look at what some of those real downward moves are, and I'll be able to have a better explanation when we show the fund chart next.
general trends again are, it's kind of the opposite of what we just saw in the previous chart. 3 years ago, we had $10 million in the bank. That's the green line. And then through that year, the capital expenditures depleted it. Blue line continues to go down. And right now, we're sitting with barely $2 million in this fund. And we've got, close to $4 million in requested expenditures at tonight's board meeting for funds that are primarily would come out of this fund. And so hence the rate increase and hopefully some transfer of funds from net operating revenues back into this fund. But this is not a trend. That's one that we can continue if we're going to do capital projects.
I would agree, and that's
Yeah.
why looking at this chart and developing this chart was important to beginning the cash flow analysis. I had to understand where you came from, looking at where you're trying to go and how we get there, and what is the appropriate fund policy. It was very challenging to try to fund this reserve with the amount of projects that you had scheduled on the books. So that's something that we need to take a look at.
And again, we have a reserve policy here to try and maintain a certain amount of reserves in this fund. And I think it's, again, similar to the other one, like 50% of the next 5 years projects, which is probably considerably higher.
It's about $13 million higher.
We're not meeting our reserve policy at this point.
But FY24 or FY25 is looking at
This is a lot. Dan, you following? Dave, you following this? This is stuff that on the finance committee we were looking for a long time, and so just really want to, put kudos to Liz and the accounting staff to put this together. It's absolutely critical to have these historical trends to see where we've been, so we can make sense of where we're trying to go as well. And so this is these. I don't know, maybe I'm geeky, but I really, I get a lot out of these charts. They're very, very important. Much more than a snapshot of where your cash is today, seeing these trends.
Explain to me on the last chart. We ended fiscal year 22 at 6 million plus. We started fiscal year '23. What numbers am I looking at here? I mean, 8,000, we ended at 8,000. Why is the discrepancy?
So one thing that you have to take into account is the numbers that make the chart are as of the end of the month. So you had a lot of activity in July. So here's what happens in July. Well, prior to June 30, everyone's jamming their invoices into accounting so that you can get it into the right fiscal year. All that activity happens in July and you see it reflected in your cash. So you ended at June 30 and that's where the line ends. When you start the line over for the next fiscal year, 30 to 31 days have gone by. So there's been that cash activity. Blake actually asked that same question at Finance Committee, and so I'm working on an illustration to be able to show you that difference.
Where that money went? Yeah, okay.
So stay tuned. It was a good question. Thanks for the tee-up. Other questions?
Yeah, a question I've got is, so this is presenting 3 years worth of information, or well, I guess two and a half.
Yeah.
Do we have this same information further back in time?
Not too much further
We
back.
have all the information, just not in chart format.
Got you.
Yeah.
So we could go back to from the data to 2019.
Okay. I think to your point, Blake, of looking at trend information, for me, month to month, which is kind of what this is, but for 3 different years is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is a longer period of time and just looking at year-end balances in the different funds to see if we're trending upward, downward, or somewhere in between.
Sure.
You can take a look at that. Other questions? Comments? Good jokes? No?
And again, I guess this fund, our RR&U, Repair Replacement Upgrade Fund, the only source of revenue for this fund is interest earned on the amount of money that we have in reserves, plus any transfer that would come from our operating fund. It doesn't have any other source of income.
Correct. Different than the wastewater capital fund that comes from connection fees, but this
Right.
also doesn't have the same restrictions that that does.
Right.
But the funding source through the funding policy is any extra money in Fund 10. Your Fund 10 money comes from rates. Other questions? We do have 2 more charts, and everyone here is riveted to get to the next 2, I can tell. We'll be quick. Wastewater reserves, here's the story it tells. You got some money, you kept some money. That is a normal story for a capital reserve account. This one was the one that I took a lot of the data in looking at the connection fee amounts and looking to see how that will impact your cash, how it can impact the use of the fund for future capital projects. So more to come on that one, but I did definitely use a lot of this data for that. Okay, let's go to the last one, emergency contingency fund balances. This one's a slam dunk. I think it's down further in the packet. So a couple of years ago, you had more money in it, you changed your fund policy, you have less money in it. The money stays in it, the money earns interest. At the end of the year, the interest comes out and we do other things with it. That is what the line chart tells you. No other story here. You said you haven't had an emergency, that's great. You haven't had any rate reserves that you needed to use it for, that's great, sorry. Okay, that's the last of my pretty charts to show you all. Are there other questions about the financials? I have the wish list for some different charts for next month.
Anything from anybody?
No, I got it.
No? Okay. No, thanks again. I think that really is a really valuable way of presenting the data, and maybe we can look at Dan's method also. as we go
Absolutely, I'll
forward.
bring it to Finance Committee.
Okay. That was just a discussion item, no action. Item 2 is on a discussion and approval of selected comparable agencies and a selection of a classic or Petra as. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay.
We do need to ratify the financial statement.
Oh, all right. I think we already asked about comments, so I'll entertain a motion to ratify the financial statement.
I so move.
I'll second.
Moved by Wilson, seconded by Smelser. Roll call.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Director Cox,
Yes.
Director Wilkins,
Yes.
Director Smelser,
Yes?
Director Tresson.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Okay, on to the item that I think
Sorry about that.
the full house is here for regarding our limited comp and classification study. I can read the item, but why don't we get started? Vicki, are you starting us off with this? Great.
Good morning, President Treesan and directors. In a minute, we're going to have Gallagher, formerly known as Coffin Associates, present an update on the class and comp study for us. But for informational purposes, just wanted to share that TTSA's comp and class study began in January of 2024 and is expected to be completed around June of 2024. To date, we have had several meetings with Gallagher as well as several meetings with staff. And in those meetings, we have established the 12 job classifications to be reviewed, and Gallagher has performed their interview with staff in the affected classifications. The general manager, myself, and the 4 individuals from the observation group have met with Gallagher to discuss an objective list of comparable agencies, and we've discussed whether the agency would use classic or Pepper retirement as a comparator. Currently, TTSA has 27 employees that are paying their share of the employee portion of retirement, and 22 employees that TTSA is paying their share of retirement. Of those numbers, 22 are classic members with TTSA paying the employee share, 3 classic members that are paying their own employee share, and 24 PEPRA members who naturally pay their own employee share. I saw you writing that down, Director Treesan.
No, you don't need to repeat it.
Okay.
I get.
Okay, very good. After Gallagher's presentation today, staff recommends that the board select the proposed list of comparable agencies and select PEPRA as a comparator for the class and comp study. And I'll turn it over to Gallagher at this point.
Georg, I gave you permissions. I gave you permissions as a panelist and co-host, so you can.
Is my audio coming through?
It is, yes.
Okay. I'm having some technical difficulties. I think it might be Zoom related, but for some reason my video won't come back. You can hear from me and it's beep. Does that sound good?
You broke up a little bit, but we are hearing you. Were you going to share your presentation, or did you want me to do that?
I told him
Okay.
that you would be sharing it.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share it.
It would be great if you could do that. I'm afraid to. Yeah, please.
Okay, absolutely. Actually, hang on. Just a second. Okay. Go right ahead. Can you see that?
Well, thank you. It's not coming up on my screen, but I can just follow along on my end.
I want to make sure that the rest of our board can see that too. Dale, are you seeing that? Oh, you're muted. Hang on. I'm not hearing you, Dale. You got to take off your headphones.
Well, we're waiting for that. I noticed that, and I recall Richard and you and Vicki mentioning that it's not just management that's been working with Gallagher. You have what you've termed a observation group. Would it be okay to get folks that are in the observation group just to raise their hand? I'm not sure how many folks are in that, but
4 of them.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for participating in that. I appreciate that. Good to know.
Yeah, it has, at least from my perspective, it has been extremely helpful in getting information, quality information out to staff and getting a lot of staff feedback for the study. Yeah.
How we doing?
Okay. Georg, can you see and hear everything?
I can hear you, yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
Wonderful. Well, I'll just kind of walk you through the presentation here. The main goal, of course, is to talk about the comparable agencies that we're going to survey for the compensation study. We can actually jump a couple of slides to slide number 3, if you could. There are 2 other study variables that we will discuss with agency's leadership and the observation group, and those are the benchmark jobs we're going to survey. So benchmarking is basically a process of looking at all of the agency's jobs and all the different levels within the various job classifications, and then determining which levels within each classification we're going to go out and survey. So that's called job benchmarking. And the third component of what we're going to be looking at is, in addition to base salaries, we're also going to look at benefits for full compensation purposes. So those are 2 additional benchmark jobs, and benefits are 2 additional survey elements that we need agreement on. But again, the main focus today is to talk about comparator agencies. We can actually jump to the next slide. Thank you. And we've gone through, as we kind of started this conversation, we've gone through a very comprehensive process in determining which agencies we should survey. And there are multiple factors that we look at when we determine which agencies are most similar to TTSA. There are 2 main considerations when we do this, when we do this analysis. One is to ensure that we are able to, in the survey market we identify, we're able to represent who TTSA is as an agency. That has to do with organizational structure, organizational the organizational design of the organization. It has to do with the types of services and programs that are provided. Really making sure that we are able to identify agencies that essentially perform similar work and deliver similar services to TTSA, because that is how we will ensure that we're able to find a sufficient number of job matches at those other agencies. And that is really the ultimate goal of any compensation study, is to identify similar jobs out there in the labor market. So industry-specific comparators are important. The other aspect that we look at is to certainly also make sure that we represent the local and regional labor market. Now, you all know this better than I do, that Truckee Basin is a very unique labor market in terms of just the limited number of employers, also to a degree limited amount of highly specialized talent, and so we've done quite a bit of work in the Tahoe region over the years, and certainly find that invariably for every compensation study we perform, we have to go outside of the Tahoe Basin to find a sufficient number of comparable agencies. So that's the other aspect that we look at, is basically geography, it's labor market, and then other aspects or factors we identify and analyze are related to the number of employees, they're related to budgets, and also we look at factors that are related to cost of living and cost of labor. And so we did kind of an initial pass at coming up with a list of agencies. Again, it was a collaborative effort working with leadership and the observation group to establish a list. I think it was almost about 30 agencies that ended up on the original list. We then went off and did our analysis based on the various factors that you're seeing on this particular slide to identify those agencies that were most similar to TTSA. We then had another meeting with with leadership in the observation group to kind of look at the initial analysis, have additional conversations about the unique aspects of TTSA, the kind of the natural sort of supply and demand of talent, who is TTSA competing with, potentially, losing talent to, or, also poaching talent from. So what is that sort of natural exchange of talent within your competitive landscape? And again, there definitely was a lot of conversation about making sure that we're able to find a sufficient number of comparable jobs at those other agencies. And so that includes things like, making sure that the treatment processes and the types of great treatment plans that those other agencies have are also comparable, because, we want to make sure that we're able to represent the same or at least the most comparable work and the most comparable jobs at those other agencies as possible. So, we looked at the wastewater treatment plant grade as one of the factors that we looked at. And then kind of went off to do sort of a second analysis. Also, I will say, as Vicky said, it was a very collaborative process. The leadership in the observation group also went off and kind of did their analysis and looked at similarity type of factors. And then we came back together as a group to finalize the list of agencies. So again, it was a very collaborative process. Before we can actually jump to the next slide, before I get to the actual list, I just have a couple more slides about the process itself. If you don't mind moving the slide forward. This I already mentioned, so I'll just be brief. Again, when we talk about benchmarking, this means that we look at the list of all of the jobs and all of the levels within each job family at our client agency, and then identify those jobs that we expect to be most commonly found at those other agencies, those comparator agencies. So that's the benchmarking. The benefits, again, this is where we're going to look at, obviously base salaries, of course, and in addition, we're going to look at retirement benefits. We're going to look at insurance benefits around health, dental, and vision insurance. We're going to look at paid time off in terms of holidays, vacation, and the other type of administrative or personal leave. And I actually have another slide, if you want to jump to the next slide, please, to talk a little bit about more about retirement benefits. So when we establish or determine the value of retirement benefits, we've really seen a pretty significant shift in the market. I'm sure you all are now very familiar with the pension reform that was implemented now 11 years ago, and we're really seeing a shift of the market, and many agencies are moving or shifting from a majority pre-PEPRA, or what we sometimes call classic workforce, to a predominantly PEPRA workforce. And in addition, we find that the vast majority of new talent that agencies bring in tend to also be PEPRA hires. And so we've really seen a shift in the industry to get away from evaluating classic retirement benefits and really looking at the value of the PEPRA benefits. Now, as you all know, PEPRA in itself as a program is essentially a non-competitive benefit, because every agency has the same. There's only one PEPRA program or formula or plan, if you will. And so it retirement takes a little bit of the sort of the competitive nature of PEPRA, or I should say CalPERS, out of the equation. There's also, obviously, there's really no variability in the benefit formulas, because there's it's 2% of 62 for miscellaneous type of employees, and that's across all agencies. And really, we find now that the PEPRA level of the benefit is a more accurate reflection of the benefits that the vast majority of employees now receive in the public sector. So I wanted to mention that as well, because that's again, a conversation that we're going to still, come back to leadership and the observation group with to determine kind of the final list of benefits, but we typically recommend serving the pepper level of the benefit at this point. Okay, next slide, please. Just a quick overview of how we actually conduct or execute compensation studies. Once we have the list of comparators, the list of benchmarks, and the list of benefits all determined, then we go out and perform the survey itself. It's a highly customized type of methodology that we have. We don't just send out questionnaires to the participating agencies, but we actually, of course, do all of the analysis ourselves with our own compensation analysts. We contact each agency, we obtain all of their necessary documentation, their job descriptions, their salary schedules, their union contracts, or other type of personnel policies and board resolutions. And then very importantly, when we do the job matching, we don't just go by titles, we go by job descriptions. And we really look at it, we do a whole position job analysis where we compare, we look at duties and responsibilities, we look at knowledge, skills, and abilities, we look at the required qualifications in terms of level of education, training, level of certification. That's very important as well. So it's a very comprehensive analysis to make sure that we are able to identify the most comparable jobs at each of the comparator agencies. Now we look for at least a 70% match, knowing that no two jobs are ever 100% exactly the same. Our matching threshold or our matching strategy is to accomplish at least a 70% match between two jobs. And then we also do a lot of follow-up with each agency just to make sure that we get all of our answers, all of our questions answered, and we can obtain documentation that basically supports and justifies all of our recommendations. Okay, next slide, please. The next slide just gives you a quick sort of a visual of what our data spreadsheets look like. I won't spend a huge amount of time on it, but you can see it might be a little bit small in terms of the font size there. But essentially for each job that we go out and benchmark, we will bring back a report that looks like this, where we identify the name of each of the comparator agencies. We'll identify the title of the job that we identify to be the match. We then will report, we'll have $3 amounts that we report. One is just the base salary. One is the value of the benefits. And the third dollar value will be base salary plus benefits added into a total compensation dollar amount. And then we do an analysis based on just your base salary so that as an agency you can see how you compare just on base. And we do an analysis on total compensation so you can see how you compare on total compensation as well. And you can then see the impact of the benefits package on total compensation, and we can further analyze what that impact is. Does your benefits package somehow move the needle in terms of how you compare to the market and what your market position is? Next slide, please. This slide just gives you kind of the step-by-step process of what happens once we've completed the market survey itself. And the market survey provides you data that essentially gives you a reference point so you can understand how you compare to the market, what your current position is in the market. Are you towards the middle of the market? Are you on the lower end or the higher end of the market? It may certainly change depending on each individual job. But that gives you the information you'll need to then say, well, now that we know how we are currently positioned in the market, where do we want to be positioned in the market? So it's a little bit of a sort of a compensation philosophy type of conversation, and based on that we can design or update the agency's compensation structure and then use the market data to place jobs or job classifications into that compensation structure. Certainly we will obviously rely on the market data heavily because that's the whole reason of doing a market survey. But for any jobs that we didn't benchmark or any levels within a classification series or job family that we did not benchmark, we would internally align by looking at internal relationships. And We do pay attention to internal relationships also. So we look at, when we talk about pay equity, we look at two types of equity. One is external equity, which is essentially aligning the agency with the market so that you're able to pay competitive wages. And the other type of equity is internal equity, which means looking at internal relationships and alignments within all the jobs within the agency. And then finally, we'll develop a final report and recommendation to essentially deliver a sort of a final product, a final package to the agency that will also include, some guidelines regarding implementation, some guidelines regarding continued maintenance and administration of the compensation structure. All right, I think with that we can go to the next slide, and the next slide actually provides you the list of the comparator agencies that we've identified based on that lengthy process that I've described. And again, just revisit really quickly, again, the main focus of the analysis that led us to this list was services provided, the type of organization, the organizational structure. We looked at population served or clientele, if you will, constituents. We looked at budgets. We looked at number of employees. We looked at the grade of the treatment planned at each agency. So again, making sure that we're able to represent who you are as an agency and your industry. Then, as you can see, there are also some local agencies on the list because we want to ensure, of course, that we're able to represent your general labor market in the Tahoe Basin. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, we did need to go beyond the Tahoe Basin to identify agencies that are as similar as possible to TTSA.
Georg,
I'd like to mention.
we had a question.
Did the observation group vet these agencies?
Yes, they did.
Okay. Thank you.
And are the comparator agencies listed 1 through 12? Is that the same order that you have on your slide here?
This order looks to be alphabetical to me.
It's on the slide. So it is.
Yeah, this was just our alphabetical listing of the agencies, but these basically are from the almost 30 agencies that we analyzed. These are the 12 that we all sort of collectively felt were the best representation of who you are as an agency, who TTSA is as an agency, and your general labor market.
And Georg, how does this list compare to the class and comp or salary survey we did about 4 years ago and the comparable agencies then?
I will probably need to let maybe Vicki address this in a little bit more detail. It is my understanding that in the last survey, which Gallagher did not perform, but in the last survey there were a few smaller local agencies on the list, and they essentially resulted in very few job matches, and so that's certainly something that isn't uncommon when we do these kinds of surveys. The smaller the agency and the less similarity there is in terms of services provided, the less likely you're going to find a sufficient number of job matches, and so that's really something we want to be able to avoid. Is a lot of agencies that just might only give us 4 or 5 or 6 job matches when we're going to survey about 30 jobs, and so that's certainly something that we did take into consideration.
I'm going to get the list for you.
Okay. I think Vicki's pulling that up if you want to, unless there's other questions.
Georg, continue. Were you at a spot where you were seeking input, or did you have more presentation to go through?
Yes, I'm sorry. There's one other point I wanted to make about the list of agencies. If there's, you can probably see that there are some Bay Area agencies on the list, and Again, that's from my experience is fairly common that if we're going to go outside of the Tahoe Basin labor market, it's usually going to move us closer to the Bay Area. That's one. So if there's a concern about cost of living, for example, or there are ways for us to apply geographic adjustment factors to the data of any agency where cost of labor that we look at, where cost of labor is significantly different. I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out as well, in case there's concern about the cost of living influencing the cost of living in the Bay Area having an undue influence on the outcome of the survey. Now, I want to make sure you understand that we apply a cost of labor adjustment factor. Cost of labor is a similar measurement to cost of living, but it is much less volatile. Cost of living, of course, includes everything from the cost of milk, bread, and butter, or what we call the bread basket of goods, but also housing and gas and everything in between. Whereas cost of labor measures the cost of wages in any given geography, and so that's really what you are able to control as an employer is cost of wages. So again, if the cost of wages, what we call cost of labor, is significantly different between TTSA and any of these agencies, we're able to apply a geographic adjustment factor. That's one. The other question that you might have: why didn't we look at comparable agencies in Nevada, for example, since Nevada is so close in terms of location or geography? And really what we have found, there's a couple of reasons. One is certainly that certification requirements, for example, are different in Nevada, right? There's different state certifications there. So some of the comparability between TTSA's jobs and jobs in Nevada may be challenging to establish. We've also found that Nevada, comparing the compensation in California to the types of compensation packages that are provided in Nevada's public sector are also significantly different. So we have found that it's really very much an apples and oranges comparison to compare those different types or structures in terms of compensation alone. So I wanted to just point out those two factors as well. I would imagine you might have had some questions about that. And other than that, I have one more slide, and then I'm ready to answer questions. Just to give you a quick, if you want to move to the next slide, just to give you a quick overview of the total timeline of the study. Of course, we've already been working on this for a little while. Our goal would be to complete the entire project within 6 years. So we're targeting June for completion. You're probably aware that there's also a classification component that we're working on, where we're looking at some job classifications and job descriptions and making sure that those positions that we're studying are classified appropriately and that we're able to revise the agency's class specifications. And then on the compensation side, obviously, I've just walked you through all of that, in terms of deliverables that you would see at the end of this process. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or provide any additional comment.
Thank you, Georg. This is Blake. You mentioned the cost of living and the cost of labor, and I think I read in your report that we basically tossed out the cost of living analysis, but I'm just curious, anecdotally, we talk about the Bay Area, but it seems like, do you have data on that? Is the Truckee area any less expensive as far as cost of living than the Bay Area?
It honestly really depends on where in the Bay Area you're looking, and while the Bay Area when you think about the 9-county Bay Area, you might say, well, cost of living should pretty much be the same everywhere. But there definitely are nuances. When we look at cost of labor, we actually look at the cost of labor within each city where each agency is located, and so there is some nuance. Now, some agencies are much more similar to the Tahoe region. Like I'm looking at my cheat sheet here, for example, Napa. You might think being wine country that might have a much higher cost of labor, but it actually doesn't. It's within that 5% threshold of, of where, the Tahoe region. When you look at, the agencies on the peninsula, I think there might be one on the list. On the peninsula here, the cost of labor is a little bit higher than the Tahoe region. So it really just goes to show that, there really is a lot of detail that goes into the analysis, and we'll certainly be sure to, apply the most appropriate approach to providing you data that is as much an apples-to-apples comparison as possible. It's never quite a perfect science, but we try to get as close as we can.
And when you talked about the cost of labor and having some adjustment factors, is there going to be some tweaking of the pay scales for the comparators based on that cost of living, or are we going to just see actually what they're paid? I wasn't quite clear on this adjustment factor that you seem to mention.
I think what my thoughts are on this question is that we could certainly present the data both ways. If the agency has an interest or the board has an interest in seeing actual numbers compared to the adjusted numbers, we're happy to do both. But we would normally adjust data based on a cost of labor adjustment factor if the cost of labor is, we usually look at least more than 5%. So if the cost of labor is within 5% of the Tahoe Basin, then we usually do not make an adjustment, but if it's more than 5%, we typically do.
And that's a wholesale number for all jobs, or is it somehow broken out by, kind of the type of positions, administrative versus specialty type jobs? There's a lot of variety of job positions that we have at TTSA, or is that
right? It would be the same adjustment factor for the entire agency.
Okay.
So if we're saying, I'm just going to pick another one, let's say Central Marin Sanitation Agency, if we find that their cost of living is more than 5% different, then we would adjust all of those job matches from Central Marin based on that adjustment factor.
Yeah.
Because the cost of labor factor in each geography or in each community measures all jobs as an aggregate. So there's only one adjustment factor for each geography.
Okay. I guess, and I guess you're looking for direction from the board, and, we have to come to a consensus. My sense would be that I wouldn't want to adjust their salaries, but I think some table showing what those adjustment differences are, in a separate table would be good, for us to understand what they are, but not actually apply any adjustments, at least at the first blush, but provide us with what those cost of labor differences are amongst the comparator agencies.
Yes, absolutely. We're happy to do that. And look, at my video just popped back, so there you go for the final few minutes here. But yes, absolutely, we're happy to do that. And like I said, we can certainly show the data both ways so that you can see what the unadjusted data looks like as well as the adjusted data, and what the adjustment factors were in terms of percentage.
And there's a lot of stuff that we could discuss here. If I'm not mistaken, though, I just want to try and keep on track in that what staff and the consultant are looking for at the end of the day today from us is, the comparator agencies and the, whether we're going to go with the classic or PEPRA as the sort of total compensation comparison. So, I think it's, there's a good opportunity with the consultant available if we have other fine points in this thing that we want to discuss, but I think, just to remember, I think that is what they're looking for. And so, with that in mind, thank you, Georg. I'll open it up first to the board for questions or answers or discussion. Dale, do you have anything you want to say?
Nope.
No.
I don't
All right.
have any comments.
Very good. Easy. Dave?
I would like to see some, I don't know how it would be done, but a comparison of the commute, where in Marin it may not be that big a deal, and in some of these other facilities, it wouldn't be like driving from Reno to Truckee.
Georg, did you catch that? There's a question about the, some level of, quantification of how far people commute to work at TTSA versus other agencies. Is that something that's ever done in these studies, or is that?
Would that fall under the cost of living? I don't know.
I would say it's a little bit of both. Certainly, we do look at geographic proximity, and we would probably anticipate that at 20 to 30, in an ideal world, if there ever were one, if we could draw a 20 or 30 mile circle on a map around our client agency and found 12 agencies that are exactly like you, that would be the perfect labor market. Now, that almost never exists, and as I mentioned earlier, of course, you all know this better than I do. The Tahoe Basin is a very unique labor market, and so pretty much every time we do a study in the Tahoe region, we know we're going to have to go outside of the Tahoe Basin to identify a sufficient number of comparable agencies that are arguably that are outside of what you would consider a reasonable commute. Which I think we all can assume that no one living in Truckee is going to drive to Napa every day to go to work. I mean, maybe there is a person or two. It's probably unlikely. So we do think about that, but geographic distance or proximity alone in itself, is obviously not the only factor that we analyze. It's many other factors as well.
Dave, any other?
Well, I just think about that commute, cost of living. If you live in Truckee, it costs more than to live in Nevada. But then on the other hand, you would look at that commute coming up from Reno, and that adds to your cost of living. And I'm just wondering if that's considered.
I think maybe if I understand your question, we do sometimes. It's not an uncommon question to think about, well, where are the employees coming from, and where do they live, and what is the cost of living of where employees live. That is actually not something that we're able to take into consideration, because it would, number one, it would be an almost impossible analysis, because we would have to do it for every single agency that we analyze, right? And we don't know where every agency's employees live, and where individuals live is certainly a personal choice that you make, right? All we can do is look at the employer, so the agency, and the cost of labor in the location where, again, while we look at geographic proximity, it's really between agencies, not how far employees are commuting to get to that agency.
Okay.
Dave, any other comments on comparator agencies or the Petra Classic item? Dan?
A couple. So it looks like when we did this study, I think it was 4 years ago, we had 12 agencies that were survey agencies banned. What's being recommended to us right now is that we maintain 6 of those and we replace 6 of those. So basically we'd be maintaining Delta, Diablo, Napa, North Tahoe PUD, South Tahoe PUDs, Tahoe City PUD, and TSD. And then we'd be replacing Truckee-Donner PUD with Union Sanitary. We'd be replacing Squaw Valley Public Service District with Silicon Valley Clean Water. We'd be replacing Mammoth Community Water District with Oro Loma. We'd be replacing Incline with Monterey, replace El Dorado with Fairfield, and then replace City of Sparks with Central Marin. So what we're basically looking at doing is deleting agencies that are more geographically proximate to us and inserting them and replacing them with agencies that are further away, but I think the consultant's explanation was that are likely to give us more comparable positions than the ones that are more geographically proximate, and that's the rationale for using those. And I can appreciate that. I would be interested in, so I think the question before us right now is what data do we want to see? Because at the end of the day, we're going to have to make a policy decision as it relates to how to implement this. I would be interested in seeing just the straight-up survey of the 12 agencies. So I'm okay with these 12 agencies. I'll start with that are recommended. I would want to see just the straight-up wage survey, but then also I'll call it the wage survey that has the adjustment for costs of labor, because I'd be curious to see how different those two things are. I think there's a general opinion that labor in the Bay Area costs more than it does here in Truckee. I'm not sure if that's actually true. I'd be curious to know that, though, and if we've got the ability to, through this consultant exercise, get that information, I'd like to get that and see how much that has an effect on potential wages we would be paying here. So that's one comment. And that's probably my only comment as it relates to the survey agencies, is if we could see the data both ways, that would be good from my perspective. As it relates to PEPRA versus Classic, it looks like this has always been a challenging issue because we've got Classic employees, which are the longer term employees, have a richer benefit package, and it's just the way it is. And then the PEPRA employees have a less rich retirement package, both in terms of the amount of money that they're going to earn during retirement, but also in terms of how much the agency contributes on their behalf. So the PEPRA employees have to pay their share of PERS. The Classic employees, the agency pays their share of PERS. So so I'm supportive of using PEPRA as the baseline for figuring out total compensation. The net result of that, I think, is that it's going to show accurate total compensation for the PEPRA employees, but for the Classic employees, we're actually providing an additional 8% compensation above what the survey is going to show. And so the question, so I think the net result of this is by going with PEPRA, at the end of the day, what I'm expecting is that our pay ranges are going to be 8% higher than they would be if we use Classic employees as the baseline. Because if we use Classic employees, that 8% that the agency pays on their behalf gets factored into the total compensation equation. And if we use PEPRA employees, that doesn't get factored in. So I'm supportive of using PEPRA as the baseline. The question in my mind, though, is if we then implement wage ranges that are going to be 8% higher because we're using PEPRA, should we be looking for Classic employees at the agency phasing out, the agency paying the Classic employees' share of PERS, and look to the Classic employees to begin paying that directly instead of the agency paying it on their behalf? I don't think the Classic employees are going to be harmed by that at the end of the day, because they'll end up with higher pay ranges, which will actually help them in their retirement. Their retirement will be richer by having the higher pay range. But I think that would get us to a point where it's more equitable internally, which has some value from my perspective. And I know that's separate in that it's related to our kind of our what we're offering in our compensation package, but it's all intertwined. So, what I'd say is I'm supportive of using PEPRA as the baseline for the class and comp study, but what I'd be looking, for the board to have a conversation on and for management staff to be discussing with the employees is this notion that if we do that, is there support or discontent with this notion of the classic employees absorbing their contribution to PERS instead of the agency paying it on their behalf. So I'll stop with that. And if there's anything I said about this 8% thing that's incorrect, let me know. That's my understanding is how this will manifest itself.
The only one little piece that I would add in is that the agency, I believe back in 2021, if I remember correctly, put on file with CalPERS a contract in that any new classic members coming on board at TTSA would pay their share of the employee portion of retirement.
Right.
And there are 3 employees here at TTSA that are in that situation.
Right. And then
but otherwise, yes. Everything you said was accurate.
Okay.
So there'd be no change under that concept to them.
To those 3.
Just be the rest of the classic ones.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
That's it.
Yeah.
Scott, did I?
No,
on you again?
I just want to, Dan, you explained that very well. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Any other
No.
items?
No.
I think the change in the comparator agencies in general is good. I think that we'll find more comparators particularly for our operations and maintenance staff, the actual operators of the plant. These are better agencies to be comparing them. Anecdotally, I'd say as we've recruited and retained employees on the several years that I've been here, we have actually, it seems like, pulled from a lot of folks from out of the area. Even Southern California, which we don't have anybody on here, seems to be a place that we've successfully recruited from. And so I think it's reasonable to be, not being so parochial because it does seem like a lot of our folks do come from out of the area. And so I'm with Dan. Again, I think instead of applying that cost of labor factor to all the salaries, it's just a factor. I'd like to just see what the factor is. That might be an easier way of initially displaying it before we start tweaking all the bigger tables and applying it against everyone. I mean, it's just Excel stuff, but that might be something, Georg, that you can provide in the interim, just at the list of the communities that those 12 comparator agencies are and our community and what those relative labor factors are that we can take a look at. And so that'd be good. When it comes to the total compensation and quantifying, particularly the benefits, it's a really kind of, I think it's good. I like the way that the consultant is going to give us the actual just salary data and comparing that, and then they attempt to quantify the benefits. Quantifying benefits are challenging. You do have Classic and PEPRA, and even if there was some adjustment, they're still not really the same benefit. There's more benefits associated that the Classics get, the retirement age, their employee contribution, employer contributions, not just on behalf of the employee. Health benefits are a tricky one because I think we end up using the family plan, and not everybody has a family, and so that value isn't perfect either. And so I'm okay with having a table that tries to quantify those. Georg, I want to be clear, though, that we don't just end up with a column with numbers there. Hopefully we get some type of qualitative description of all the non-wage benefits and what those are that we can look at, because some of them are difficult. I didn't see you talked about retiree benefits, but you kind of focused on pension plan, we provide retiree health benefits here as well. They aren't dollars that go directly into the employee's pocket today or on any monthly paycheck, but it's money that we've committed to, and there's certainly a value to that. And I don't think every agency has that. And so I'm hoping that there's a good qualitative table that we can look at. I'm also concerned about setting a salary based on total compensation. We kind of ran into this when we looked at the change in the PERS health plans, and we were talking about, do we stick with platinum or we go to gold? And there was a way to possibly go to gold with some other things to provide the same benefit at a lower cost. And the feedback, which was valid, that staff had was our salaries were set on the cost of platinum. Now you're going to go to gold. Shouldn't we get more money? And so by linking our salaries to benefits, there's a disincentive for us to try and find cost-effective, the same benefits, because if the cost is less but the benefit's the same and you've linked it, there's potentially you're handcuffing ourselves by saying that cost should go back in terms of salary, and so there's a disincentive for trying to provide cost-effective benefits for staff. So just, that's just, I guess, foreshadowing the way I'm going to be looking at the data, that I'm going to be more interested in the salary data and the qualitative, and to some extent quantitative analysis of the benefits that we provide versus other agencies, but less interested in the quantitative comparison or linking that to total compensation, or at least understanding what's going on there, but maybe not linking it to that. It'll be interesting to see, if another agency, pays whatever, 2x for their health plan that provides the same benefits we have, should we be paying our employees more, even though they're getting the same benefit as the platinum, but they have Kaiser and they have chosen to pay twice that? That's going to drive our costs up, even though, really the health benefit is the same. So again, there's a lot of art to this, and I'm okay with the way it's put together. But, hey, Georg, you still there?
Still here, yes.
So just want to clarify, there will be a detailed qualitative as well as this quantitative analysis of all the, enumerating all the benefits that you look at and describing them, as well as quantifying them for the comparator agencies?
We can certainly do that. It probably requires a little bit more conversation about, what kind of information you'd like to see. I mean, for example, you're right, when we include the value of medical benefits, for example, what you're going to see on the data sheets will just be a dollar amount, but we can certainly provide an additional sort of like a side report, if you will, that says, okay, what's maybe, for example, the cost sharing between agency and employee at each agency. How much is the agency paying? Is it 90%? Is it 100%? Is it 100% of employee only, or is it 80% of employee plus family? So a little bit more information in that regard. I did note down you mentioned retiree health insurance. That's something we could also capture as a separate report. So there are some ways, obviously, that we can report some policy information to you. We would just have to be sure that we know which items you would like to see more information on.
But you will have a breakdown. I mean, just for instance, like vacation days, you can't see in the total compensation of this. I'm looking at the slide where you kind of show the net results. There's going to be a more detailed thing. You're going to quantify somehow the value of an agency having 15 vacation days versus 12 vacation days. But does that get buried just in your calculation, or does that get, do we see, they had 15 at, Delta Diablo versus our 12 or whatever we have?
Yeah, making a note of that. That's certainly something we can provide as well. So I'll definitely we'll think through what our dollar amounts we're going to report, and then see what kind of supporting qualitative information we can provide to the board based on what you're saying. So yeah, we definitely do that. I'll think that through a little bit more, but it shouldn't be a problem. Honestly, we do it all the time, so that should be it should be easy for the most part. The one thing we're not necessarily able to do is we're not able to provide you the level of the benefit for the medical insurance. I suppose we might be able to obtain some plan documents from each agency, but that's a little bit trickier, that kind of information. So, but we can certainly provide you with the cost sharing information. Again, not just the dollar amount, but what does that dollar amount represent? Again, is it 100% of the premium? Is it 80% of the premium? And so that you can understand how much employees are paying out of pocket at each of the comparator agencies. Would that work for you?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful in all the HRA kind of benefits, those get rolled into this as well. You guys compare those.
We can definitely look at anything that's related. So for retiree health benefits, I noted that as an additional item. Anything that's health related, so if there's a health savings account or another type of contribution that's made on behalf of employees, we will report that as well, yes. And we will footnote that also so that you know what that dollar amount represents.
And then, I would think that although in the quantitative table that might quantify the benefits, you would include, and I would agree that PEPRA is the appropriate comparator, but in that more qualitative table, it might be interesting to, along the lines Dan was talking about, provide, what their classic plan is. Do they contribute to their employees' share or not? Just to, be able to benchmark us against others and what other agencies are doing, or at least our comparator agencies. And so that might not show up in the quantitative table, but in that qualitative table, while you're asking them, it seems like it would be good to gather that information also.
That sounds good. We can certainly do that.
Okay. So, I guess we're at a point where it sounds like I'm hearing a consensus of using the comparator agencies provided. Dan, did you have another question?
I'll let you wrap up. But
so I think we're at the point where we're saying yes, PEPRA, yes to the comparator agencies that have been presented, and then there was a bunch of other kind of direction to provide additional information as we go through this, and some kind of foreshadowing of the way that we may be looking at this data when it comes back.
The other, and I'm curious to hear what comes out of public comment as well before we provide final direction, but the other thing I would like to see is, so the last time we did the class and comp study, we benchmarked our wage ranges to be at the 75th percentile of the comparable agencies. We haven't made that decision yet. I guess the question, Georg, is, are you looking for direction on that now? What I'd be interested in seeing is what's the difference between benchmarking at the 50th percentile and the 75th percentile? Again, kind of like the including cost of labor adjustments versus not. I'm curious to see what the sensitivity is of that. I'm also curious to see what the sensitivity would be of a 50th percentile versus a 75th percentile target. So,
if I can interject, that is part of the scope is to look at both the 75th
that's
and
already baked in.
And the intent would be at a future, get future board direction on which one would be implemented.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and I'm not sure what the next check-in point is, but again, I'm looking at this, I'll flip my screen around, this kind of final data sheet, and the example shows, where do we sit compared to the average, where do we sit compared to the median, but, it'd be interesting to know what percentile are we at now, and what is the 75th percentile number and our difference from that, given that that's what we used the last time we did a compensation study. And
That sounds
again,
good. I made a note. We can certainly easily include the 75th percentile. That's not a problem at all.
And so I think we've provided some good direction there. I guess I have another question. Is there additional check-ins that are going to, in the process and the timeline and deliverables, remind me, the next time the board's going to see this, is this going to be when basically we have those tables all flushed out and kind of a draft for us to review, or is there another check-in point? I'm just curious.
With the time frame, we'll probably be checking in at every board meeting from here on until July. We'll definitely, and I can check in prior to as we formalize the data tables and get feedback so that when we check in at the board meeting, we're ready to go with the data. And I think just as the data comes available, those next points of whether we implement 75th percentile or not would be at future dates with the hope of July being wrapped up.
Sounds good. Dave, did you have anything else you want to say?
Nope, we're good.
I'll open it up to you guys. I appreciate you guys' patience. Again, thanks to the observation group. Is that what it was called?
Yes.
For your help. And so if staff has any feedback, comments you want to make to the board based on the comments you've heard, we're all ears. Don't be shy. You got an observation group with staff? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I think. Come on over.
Part of the observation group here, and I want to start off with saying.
What was your name again? I apologize.
Jeff.
Jeff. Okay, thanks. Jeff.
I've done a couple of these before other districts I've been at, and I want the board to recognize that Richard and Vicki have been very open. The collaboration's been great. I've never been part of one that's been this smooth. That being said, some of the comments were made with the Pepper versus Classic. I'd like the board to also consider that there will be no more classics coming in ever. I all do pay my portion of PERS. I don't care about that. That's what I signed up for. But also consider, I believe in the next 5 years, we'll probably have 10 positions that are available for retirement. We're recruiting another 4 or 5 right now. They'll probably also be paying up in portions. So when you're looking at these numbers, they're going to get skewed very quickly. So we're making those considerations. Sometimes people are just like, this is what I signed up for, leave me what I got. That's about it.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I'm sure you guys all have thoughts, and maybe this isn't the right forum, or you're uncomfortable. I encourage you to talk to Jeff or any of the observation group or Richard and Vicki. Great to hear that you guys are trying to be as transparent as possible. That's what we like to see, and so please do get feedback. And yeah, we're going to be looking at this, it sounds like, for the next three or so board meetings as the data comes in. And so, but if you have thoughts, I'd say encourage you to speak early. Don't wait till the end. So,
I thought I heard something about there won't be any consideration for cost of living, just cost of labor.
Gary, would you clarify that again? I thought I read in your report summary that the cost of living was kind of being thrown out of the analysis.
Yeah, we looked at the analysis both ways and found that between geographic distance in terms of mileage and cost of living, those were basically two factors related to geography that kind of skewed the analysis a bit towards a lot of the agencies that we ended up selecting actually dropped to the bottom in terms of level of similarity, and so we felt that was an overemphasis on the geography. So we looked at it both ways and found that not looking at cost of living was moved us in a better, more sort of
So
that makes sense.
You're breaking up a little there. I think what Gary said is that they try and find a good comparator agency, they look for places that have similar costs of living that didn't really work so well with finding good comparators for us, but it doesn't sound like they actually use some sort of cost of living factor to tweak the data anyway. It's just a method of finding other comparator agencies that align well with
My only
with us.
concern wasn't really taking into account either. I do live here in Truckee. I know a lot of people commute from Reno and the fuel and all that. It's great. But just speaking as a homeowner in Truckee, things have gone on out of control. They've gone. So homeowners is up over 300%. Snow removal, utilities, fuel. I mean, I just think for people who live here locally,
Right.
that want to be close to a job like this, some consideration should be.
Georg, I don't know that you could hear the staff person was basically, again, expressing, I think, a recognition of the high cost of living, specifically in Truckee, and specifically around housing, and any ability to, factor that somehow into the actual analysis. I guess similar to perhaps a tweaking of salaries based on the cost of labor, a adjustment, because of Truckee's high cost of living.
Yeah, we have had some new hires that tried to make it here in Truckee, and actually had to move to Reno and start commuting because of that very reason. I mean, just trying to find a place, let alone afford the rent, and buy a place is
Yeah. Georg, you're the expert on this. Is there, similar to this cost of labor, is there a number that they assign to geographic locations, a nice simple number that's cost of living? And can you provide...
There are costs. Sorry.
I think, when we touch base in April, if we're going to have this on the agenda, we might not have all the wage data, but again, might be at that point good to see that cost of labor and cost of living for Truckee versus the location of the comparator agency. Just if there are single numbers for each of those, and then we can see what those are and, have a discussion about the validity of somehow using some, if it's worthwhile to tweak the analysis based on that. But I think it was is a fair question to ask.
I think, Georg, did you have a comment on that as well?
Yes.
Georg, I don't know raise your hand if you can hear us clearly.
So I did hear the conversation. Thank you, Blake. Yes, we do certainly provide cost of labor and cost of living data for the agency's review. And again, I think if we're presenting the data both with as well as without adjustments, that does give you a lot of good information to make your decisions on. There isn't a specific cost of housing only factor that we would be able to apply, but we could certainly look at both cost of labor and cost of living.
Yeah, I don't think the request was to do a cost of housing. It's just housing is a big part of the cost of living. And so that sounds good. Thank you. Any other points? We still got a pretty big agenda here. So at this point, I think if we provided the direction, staff and the consultant lead from the board.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're good with moving forward with the list as drafted, and we're going.
Okay, and I don't think you don't need any motion. I don't think on any of those items, do you?
I'll defer Ed. Can you weigh in on that?
It does say approval, discussion and approval of selected comparable agencies. So.
Let's go ahead and do a formal.
All right, so I'll entertain a motion regarding the comparator agencies and the selection of PEPRA as a. So we're looking for a motion that approves the provided list of comparator agencies and the use of PEPRA as a quantitative comparison for total compensation for the class and comp study.
So moved.
Okay?
I'll second.
Moved by Wilkins, seconded by Smelser. Roll call.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Director Cox,
Yes.
Director Wilkins,
Yes.
Director Smelser,
Yes.
Director Tresson.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Okay.
One final comment, if I may, Blake. You know, when we discussed our compensation, I've heard it mentioned a few times about the 75th percentile. And I got to tell you, you know, what we're going through over at Olympic Valley, and I'm sure that this is going to hold true throughout the rest of the districts in our region. The 75th percentile, gentlemen, is not going to cut the mustard. The way I'm seeing it is that over at Olympic Valley, we've got several openings in our fire department. We're paying at the 75th percentile. We're not getting any kind of response to any of our job openings. And I think that we're facing the same thing at TTSA with our administrative supervisor. I just think that when you talk about the 75th percentile, that might have been a good number pre-COVID, but now that we're into this new era, so to speak, I think we really ought to sit back and look at what is going to be the best for the agency to recruit help and to keep help. And when we talk about the 75th percentile, I just don't think that it's going to be enough to attract good people and retain good people. So, you know, this is it's going to be a discussion that I think we should have when we get the final data from our consultant here. And this is on compensation. As far as benefits, the retirement and everything, when you talk about the PEPRA and the Classic, the difference in the benefit packages for our employees, it's significant. And I really think there's a good chance that it's causing a little bit of anxiety when you have a person that's a Classic getting
Hey, Dale.
extra in benefit packages as opposed to somebody that's a new hire on PEPRA. And we've got to really sit back and think about being fair to all our employees across the board. And that's my final comment.
Okay, thanks, Dale. We'll certainly have an opportunity to deliberate on that topic. So thanks for your comments. It is a challenging labor market right now, for sure. I'm going to close item 2 at this point, and again, thank you, staff, for your interest in this and attending the meeting. We'll move on. We're going to take a 5-minute recess. Yes.
There's another bathroom to use
I know you want to confirm.
Yeah, you know how it works. I was under.
Thank you for that comment.
Yeah, we'll see. Our cost of living.
I did.
Yeah. We gotta finish them off and there's no new one.
Did you do the new one?
I don't think so. Let me know what's, yeah, what's going to happen. I have to bring my.
They won't. We have a whole palette of
Where I came from.
but they're all, you see how they're all.
Especially on the Vicky passage.
Right.
I think it's valid to point out, especially with dispatcher trucking and stuff, and not necessarily. There's so
I was trying to get to that discussion. I think it would balance out if we only look at Truckee or Tahoe area for cost of living. And the guy wants to commute from Reno. You know, one of my sons does that.
Okay. Very cool.
I think that would cover the cost of living up there. That's awesome.
I'm sorry, real quick.
How's it going? Hannah, okay. You've grown out. I was like, that's not.
ever since
I think it looks so familiar. How do I know that guy?
gotta try.
Yeah. No, hey, you should see me.
It's pretty sad.
Ridiculous. How long has that been? Not that long. Because last time I saw you, you were clean shaved. Okay.
But I kept it a little shorter for a period of time. And I'm curious how it raised.
I'm trying to get bald spots in your face. It doesn't come in good.
I've got the same thing.
Honestly, it annoys me to have
I find this stuff around his mouth is the worst part. And then
last time I let it grow, I was all around. I just shaved around here. Like, I like that. I don't
I have my moments where
I'm from somewhere else.
no, I like the Bay Area versus the region we're in. And a perfect example of what I feel like I'm back now. I love this area. Good job in the Bay Area. And then saving scene and everything like we are. It can be like committed to the community and really care. But it's all
Where's the quality of life factor, you know? I mean, and the reality is when my wife and I have traveled, I remember where we gone to Barcelona, all these places that are expensive, like Truckee prices. Our cost of living, I don't think you're going to see a decrease, you know, for cost of living. You go to the Bay Area and it's like actually inexpensive. I don't know about housing because I don't do that, but you go to restaurants and
but it all depends on where you go. So our region, if you go to the it's cheaper than Texas. If you go to it's various things. If you live in San Francisco, it's cheap. But if you go to Hollister or bad parts of Oakland, San Jose, it's cheap.
We're in the middle there.
Yeah, I'm interested in the data. I don't think I don't actually want to use it. It's like, it's too complicated.
See the data,
You know, it's
and then see the
you see where the treatment is. You know, a lot of the folks in the Bay Area are commuting in from Antigua and
Tracy.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It'll be interesting to look at. I think it's he's giving you. Don't know.
I won't. A lot of money.
All right. back to order. We still got a lot of stuff to get through here. Item 3 is on seeking approval to enter an agreement with Brown and Caldwell to perform the final design of the river crossing gravity main between manholes 33 and 35 rehab project.
Mouthful. Morning, President Tresson, Board of Directors. So we have several CIP projects that were identified as part of the master plan. Master plan was broken out into sewer projects and treatment plant project. This is one of the projects identified in the master plan. This particular section was identified as having a high priority, and so it was phased as part of phase 1 of the master plan implementation, mostly because of the river crossing aspects to it. And there was some visible sign of wear on the insides of the ductile iron and river crossings. So this was identified as a high priority. So this project is represented by about 1,380 feet of 24-inch diameter pipe from manhole 33 to 35. We received 3 proposals, and we used a qualifications-based selection system, and we identified Brown and Caldwell as the final choice, and we are recommending we go into contract with them for final design of this project. I included the proposal. I don't know how much of it you want me to go over with you guys, or if you want to ask questions.
At some point, I'd love to see a little more detail where these river crossings are and where the TRI aligns to the bike path.
Yeah.
The proposal has, a lot of. It's not just an engineering project. There's kind of coordination around hikers, bikers, and users of the trail is pretty complicated. So it'd be good for us to understand that. It seems to be a fairly large part of the project.
Yes. Permitting, environmental, major parts of the project.
So you're opening it up right now to any questions?
Any questions you might have?
Scott, any questions on
I
the
do have
project?
one quick one on the original sheet here. It says the Brown and Caldwell, the fee is $761,760.
Correct.
And then under the recommendation, it comes in at $588,365.
Yeah, that was a good one. There's a.
Oh, did that get left in?
They're good in mine.
So the actual recommendation
fiscal impact
is for the quantity and the fee or the fiscal impact.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Good catch, Scott. Any other questions on the project?
No.
Dale, any questions on the project?
No questions. What I would like, if I could, Rochelle, the cover letter for this agenda item, could you forward it to Dave Hunt at the Olympic Valley Public Service District, please?
Will do, the corrected version.
Thanks, Dale. Dave?
No, did you look at this? There is a.
Yeah,
it's upside down. It's the problem.
It's a little tricky to dial into the stuff, and again, the proximity. I like the way they took little pictures to kind of show where the manholes were, but it's still a little challenging to see. I know that we have some better mapping that we could possibly see.
We have some layers for like Google Earth and stuff that kind of spell it out a little better.
Dan?
Yeah, just real quick. So basically, this is going to be a slip lining project.
Well, part of the proposal is to identify the best solution. We think there's a possibility CIPP might make the most sense in this particular case. Slip lining is on the table and will be assessed as one of the possible solutions.
Okay. But it'll be, I'd be hard pressed to see it's like putting in brand new pipe under the river.
It's all going to be trenchless. It's likely, very likely to be a mining project, yes.
Yeah. And so, assuming that it's going to be figuring out what's the best method to kind of reinforce the interior of the pipe or protect the interior of the pipe, and then that'll require a bypass while that's being done.
That's correct.
And so I suspect a lot of this is going to be figuring out how to accomplish the bypass, given that you have to bypass from one side of the river to another.
The bypass will follow the bike lane, or bike path likely, so there it won't cross.
It wouldn't need to. Okay.
The cross is on the bike path.
Correct.
Got it.
As proposed.
Correct. So we are looking at the bypass as the preferred option. At this point, there are other options, but we're looking at a bypass as the preferred option just because of the flows we're dealing with. And
right.
The level of threat to the river potential if anything goes wrong. And having redundant piping and redundant pumping is kind of the safest way to ensure that we're
right, as opposed to trying to truck it.
Truck it or tank it or right.
And when you're saying stay on the bike path, using the bridge across? Or
wherever there's an alignment on the bike path, we'll be able to use. So effectively, what the proposal is to bypass from one manhole above the project to one manhole below the project.
Okay.
And the bike path is connects those.
Okay.
And then part of it's figuring out how to kind of maintain the use of the bike path during the project, or potentially to close it.
Correct. That's where the stakeholder discussion is going to be really strong. We're going to engage early and often, making sure we know what all of the vested stakeholders want to do and how we can accommodate where possible and make everything kind of smooth. And we're kind of trying to time it so that it's at the least impactful time of the year as well.
Right.
So there's a lot of consideration we're trying to put into this.
And the redirection of the bike path would put them up on Highway 89?
That's one possibility. There's several possibilities. Proposal identifies a straight closure. It identifies the potential for throwing them up on a protected path on 89. There's also a potential for a shuttle.
Okay.
So we're hoping we can get engagement from anyone that's interested pretty early, start identifying those things early on, because part of the scope of this obviously is to get some pretty solid construction estimates for cost, so we can assess that. I've included the line items from Fund 2 and 6 that were set aside for this. These costs were derived directly from the master plan and have not been corrected for some of the stuff we've been discussing in the last several months. So once we get our 30%, we'll have a much clearer picture on how much this project's going to cost to do.
And one other question, as part of the engineering on this, will they be determining how far below the river, the top of the pipe is from the existing bottom of the river?
We have current elevations on all of the stuff that was installed originally, and there's a ton of survey work primarily around the manholes. But as far as determining distance from the bed of the river to the pipe, I don't believe that's part of the scope.
Okay.
It would be interesting.
Yeah, I just don't know how far below the river our pipe is, and whether that has changed over 50 years.
Very good question.
The pipe probably hasn't moved, but the river bottom could have. Right.
Was that original pipe concrete encased, or how was it anchored?
I believe it was concrete encased ductile iron.
Okay. Anything else? I guess this is going to be a recurring theme for the next couple items, but I've some serious sticker shock on the cost of these, design and studies. Surprising. I've got a kind of gut sense of what things feel like they should cost, and I'd say this feels like 2x what I would have expected for the complexity and intensity of the projects. And so, I look for staff to try and work with the consultant. I understand this is a price, but I don't think they're fixed fee. They're going to be billing us, and so finding ways to try and work smart and hopefully do it at surprising.
It's also important on this one to note that there's a lot of built-in fees that we ask to be included that are likely not to be incurred. But we would rather have a little bit of sticker shock on the front end associated with permitting that we are pretty confident we're going to get exemptions on. But in the event that we do not get that exemption, we want you guys to have known about it prior rather than coming at you with change orders.
Yep, I hear you. One thing I noticed in the labor cost, the quantity of hours required for CAD design in a pipe lining project. There's really, I mean, we do pipe lining all the time. We don't do any CAD because the pipe's already there. You're just lining an existing pipe. I guess it's around the bypass system, but that's not a permanent structure, and I don't know that, you don't need as-built drawings and all that. It's a temporary structure, and so just, try and manage the project well. I did talk to Richard about some creative ideas, that might make life easier, but I'll leave it up to you guys. I definitely don't want to see one of those pipes fail under the Truckee River. Better to get ahead of that, and so I appreciate that. I also want to compliment you, and I like having those 5-year windows of the costs and the way you're distributing it between the Fund 2 and Fund 6. It's a nice addition. I haven't seen that before in capital projects, so good work there. And so, I think, you guys competitively bid it. I saw one bid came in lower, but I don't think necessarily on these kind of professional services, I trust staff's recommendation to not go with the low bidder, but go with the person you guys think is most qualified. But again, want to emphasize we're going to seeing us looking like we're going to approve this, but really put the pressure, or not pressure, but encourage you guys to manage these projects well, and work closely with the consultant to make sure that they're using their time appropriately also. So. Any other comments from board members? Comments from the public? If not, I will entertain a motion to authorize the general manager to enter into a agreement with Brown and Caldwell for the river crossing gravity main rehab project for the amounts stated in the fiscal impact item of the proposal. Moved by Cox.
I'll second.
Seconded by Smelser. No other comments. I will go to roll call.
Director Wilson?
Yes.
Director Cox?
Yes.
Director Wilkins?
Yes.
Director Smelser?
Yes.
And Director Tresman?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Yeah, and I'll just add a follow-up comment to Blake's. With these service contracts, sometimes when you get the contract amount of $750,000, that almost becomes a billing target for some consultants sometimes, as compared to, I think it's smart to cover all the possibilities in a project. I think something you could contemplate is, and it's also smart to not have to keep coming back to the board for contract amendments, because that can slow these things down too. Another strategy, though, could be to execute the consultant, negotiate the consultant contracts to a lower amount based on an assumption that you're not going to need certain permits or certain work activities, but requests from the board, contingency authorization to the general manager to do contract amendments with the consultant should those tasks become necessary. So that way the consultant contract amount is, maybe it's $500,000 instead of $750,000, and it kind of changes the expectation in terms of what they may be trying to bill to on a project. So anyway.
Fair enough. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Did we do a roll call yet?
Yeah.
Okay, so on to item 4, discussion, review, approval of the nutrient removal alternatives evaluation process study.
So last month I gave you guys a presentation on the proposal as it stood at the time. There was some specific issues that came out that you guys had requested a little bit of clarity on, or a little bit of increased specificity. So we worked with Carollo, and I think we've identified most of the things that we discussed. So we did add several more opportunities for board input. There are 4 touch points at this stage where it'll give the board an opportunity to see where we're going as staff working with Corolla, what decisions are looking likely, whether or not the direction is of the project is going the way the board would like it to go. So there is an opportunity to discuss the evaluation parameters in a board setting. That's early tasks 2 and 3, and discuss the current facility evaluation. Like you had mentioned that, so we added an opportunity so we can really get into what aspects are involved with that were not performed as part of the master plan. And then there is a second that will give an opportunity to discuss the shortlisted alternatives, which is the 4 alternatives we discussed and what priorities and what level of preference each one has at that stage. And then we'll be presenting the selected alternative to the board as a complete idea prior to moving forward with a 10% conceptualization. So those points were added to give you guys a little bit more of an opportunity to engage in the project. Make sure you're familiar with where the direction is. We were also pretty confident that enough has changed in the facility in the last short number of years with us especially moving to sodium hypochlorite and getting some new flow measurement equipment put in place that we would like to see a pretty extensive look at the data again using more current information. So we're pretty confident with that aspect of the study. And then is in regards to whether or not and how we proceed with a 10% design, we're kind of the opinion that the 10% design gives us an opportunity to get a lot of value up front while we're in the data. That 10% design, assuming, I mean, even if we end up with the alternative 1, which is to stick with the current way of doing things, a 10% conceptualization of a facility layout, we have a lot of questions right now that we don't have exactly answered by the master plan. There are plans for things that don't have identified facilities that we don't know the level to which our current power can accommodate those things. So a 10% conceptualization, even of alternative 1, is very beneficial to us, and we feel that there's a lot of value in that. That's approximately the same amount of money we paid for the 10% PDR for our digestion improvements. And we feel like when you factor in some of the stuff that's in the proposal, yard piping, electrical loading, all these things, it's a tremendously useful document to have, regardless of the selected alternative. It'll really provide us an opportunity to move better into these projects that we're seeing the sticker shock on, that we can come into these projects a little better equipped, that we can have a little bit better information to provide consultants during RFPs so that they can get us higher quality proposals. So again, we do see a lot of value in that. So we're comfortable presenting the proposal as it stands with the edits that were provided by Corolla, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Scott, any questions?
No, just looking at the 4 alternatives. Jason, you did a good job of bringing us to it. Thank you.
This universal alternatives concept can you elaborate on what that means?
So that would be where we would kind of move into that bleeding edge that Dan was talking about last time, where while we don't want to go full steam into, we're not up here setting trends a lot of times. If we don't want to go full steam into those, we do want to have some level of an assessment where we're going to have an opportunity to see some of these things that maybe aren't fully deployed a lot in the U.S. or are doing well in other countries, but maybe not here. We would have an opportunity to at least provide some comparable information so that we can, from a metric scale, that tableized decision-making matrix that you guys are going to hopefully end up with, at least it'll be on the radar at that point. And there are a few, I know we've mentioned AGS, the activated granular sludge. Sounds amazing, really does. From a wastewater professional perspective, it sounds amazing. It'd be nice to see, how does it stack up? Costs are just not coming down quickly enough. Not enough support in the U.S., not enough support in the Western U.S. Things like this might completely rule them out, but we do want to take a glance at them.
Dave? Comments, questions?
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank. No.
Dan?
I'm good.
Dale?
No questions.
Okay. Like I said, you can hear this again. You get a lot of money. Again, lean on staff to manage the project and the consultant. Well, I appreciate incorporating some of the requests that were made. Ended up in the cost going up, which was not what I expected, but not substantially. But I think it's a better scope. I feel a little bit better about the approach on that, and look forward to launching into this process.
It's going to be exciting.
Any public comment on this? Staff? Anything else? No? We'll look for a motion to authorize the general manager to enter an agreement with Corollo Engineering for the nutrient removal alternative evaluation process analysis for the amount stated in the...
So moved.
I second.
Movement and second. We'll do roll call.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Director Cox,
It's a lot of money for us study, but yes.
Director Wilkins,
Yes.
Director Smelser,
Yes.
and Director Tresson.
Yes.
Motion approved.
You saw the reserves in fund.
I did indeed. I was there. I was part of that same conversation. Yes.
All right, now we're moving on to actually the larger project of the three. Seeking approval to enter an agreement with Brown and Caldwell to perform the final design of the digestion improvements project. Scott?
Good morning, Board. Scott Fleming, Senior Engineer. Here this morning to present this project to you guys. Talking about spending some more money here. I'll try to keep it short. This first slide is intended just to kind of give you guys frame of reference. I like photos for visuals. Those are the same boilers that are currently in operation. They were installed in 1977, so pushing close to 50 years. This equipment's, I think, beyond the point now where we should have replaced it. This project's been on the books for a number of years, and we're finally ready to move into the final design. So just some key elements I put on this slide. So just a basis of what this project's about. You mind going back real quick, Michelle? Sorry. Yeah. So the boilers provide heat to the facility, both process and comfort heating. We currently have steam boilers. There's been major failures and issues, and I talked about safety in the middle, so I won't go into it too much. There's regulatory and code compliance issues and concerns with just replacing them in kind. So if that ran through your head in the proposal, you'll see there's a new boiler building proposed. All three consultants in the proposals all suggested that, as well as in the PDR previously. To bring the facility up to code compliance, we can't really get around that at this point, and that's been a consistent comment we've received. Another aspect is the construction feasibility. Sorry if I'm jumping through this quick. I know we don't want to back it. So there's a lot of interconnections in the facility for different systems. So I think what you're seeing with the cost too, when we talk about costs and some of these projects being quite expensive, I put the fiscal year amounts in there just so you guys are aware. $20 million over the next 5 years is extensive. It's a beast of a project. And the next slide will show that and represent it a little bit more. But I mean, this is basically, I look at it as almost a nerve center for ops, and for maintenance. It's a critical component for us to achieve all our regulatory compliance requirements for our solids, and it's long in the tooth and it has to be done, unfortunately. So we need to figure these key critical pieces out in time. So with that in mind, I was going to briefly talk on the funding and the environmental stewardship piece. This kind of plays into the proposals we received. One of the key elements that I discussed in the memo is one of the driving factors that the selection committee, we had a panel on it of six staff members, and the Brown and Caldwell proposal really stood out from the standpoint they were looking at creative solutions for us to identify potential funding sources. So I don't want to get up here and sell you guys that we're going to get full funding on this project, but there's potential to recoup some cost associated with that. So we'll know more as we get into design, but some of the key project elements that Brown and Caldwell incorporated into the proposal stood out to us. So specifically in that proposal, if you have a chance to read it, there's a system called organic Rankine cycle, and their methodology for sizing boilers will allow us to basically waste off that excess heat and run the boilers at better conditions to make them last longer, while at the same time recovering energy that can be repurposed for the facility. So it's not a substantial amount. It might be like, I think ORCC, I'm looking over the consultant, like 10% maybe energy recovery for the heat. Yeah. But it's better than nothing. Yeah. So, we also historically have looked at cogeneration at the same time with stuff like this project. Financially, it's still really, I think, based off the size of our facility, doesn't seem to pencil. So while there is funding available for things like cogen, it's just for this project scope and size and complexity, it doesn't track. But other than that, we're also, as part of this project, trying to optimize for long-term planning and future improvements. There's some state bills out there requiring redirection of food waste, et cetera. So we want to make sure to plan accordingly with facility placement that we can accommodate those pieces. And so another key component of this proposal was the Think Like a Master Planner statement that also had a lot of resounding effect with us as staff, is just making sure that we're planning for things like the nutrient removal and if there's an alternative selected and how those tie-ins will play into this facility as well. So one example would be CO2 capture. Currently, our chemical treatment process we use, we take CO2 off from the boilers and we pipe it over for recarbonation processes. That facility might not be needed in the future, depending on what the alternative selected is. So this is just one example of how this project can incorporate the findings of that nutrient removal as we move through. So we might be able to save some money in there too from things like that. So moving to the next slide there, Rochelle. So I don't know if you want to click, I forgot these all kind of populated individually, but this is just a slide representing all of the facilities and related systems that potentially might be impacted. I'm not going to go through every one, but it was just meant for an informative basis for you guys to see it. I realize the font's too small for most of it, but
I can zoom in where you need me to.
Oh, it's okay. The intent was just to relate to you guys the complexity of the project, so you guys can kind of get a grasp of overall why financially it's such a large impact for us over the next 4 years. So, with that, turn it over for questions.
Thanks, Scott. Scott?
No, at this point.
Dale?
No comment.
Dave? Dan?
I'm curious what the expected fuel source would be for the new boilers.
Yeah, so we can talk about that a bit. So currently, our original system was designed with digester gas as the primary fuel source, and then we have natural gas and fuel oil or diesel as backup. The intent moving forward is a dual fuel boiler system based around natural gas and digester gas. The digester gas would still be the primary fuel source, with natural gas being a backup if we weren't able to meet demand. So, and the fuel oil piece of it, it's just effectively having tri-fuel boilers is not ideal for us, and it's not really necessary based off of our consistency of supply of natural gas. So,
right. So, yeah. I believe we currently, the plant generates excess methane at times that we flare off. Mm-hmm. Will this project in any way kind of look at whether that's still the preferred practice in terms of flaring it off versus trying to do something else with that methane gas?
Exactly. So I guess to go more into detail about that, in the summer months we tend to not have as much heat demand for digester heating operating meso. We might increase that if we move over to thermophilic operation with some other improvements, but still in the summer months traditionally we would be flaring off most of our digester gas or methane. The intent of the project and what was a nice feature of Brown and Caldwell's proposal is instead of flaring that off, we still need to replace the candlestick flare. It doesn't meet code requirements for setbacks, for ANSI standards. It needs to be 50 feet from a building. It's not really the safest option. So part of the proposal is to replace that flare and relocate it to the code compliant setbacks. But the other piece of it is instead of flaring off in the summer months, this goes back to energy recovery, we'd rather keep those boilers burning that digester gas year round at higher levels to get better efficiency out of the boilers, as well as they just perform better overall, and it allows us to size them larger. So in order to offset burning that digester gas, you need to do something with that heat you're generating from the boilers that we don't need in the heat loops for the hot water supply. So you can do it one of two ways. BNC proposed having basically a heat waster in a sense that just kicks that heat off and radiates it out. Or the other alternative, which you could secure funding potentially for with IRA funds or other, is it's called organic Rankine cycle, which I mentioned, which basically you take that hot water, you put it through the cycle, it uses a refrigerant, and then basically spins and generates electricity as a benefit. So it's an environmental solution, and that kind of ties into that stewardship piece where we might not have to pay anything extra, but we get added benefit to the agency out if we can fund it. So that's what we're looking to do with that digester gas.
So with that electrical generation, would that go directly back to the plant?
Yeah, that would be the intent to tie it back in.
Okay.
Richard gets really excited about this piece of it.
So that might reduce the electricity bill that we pay each month.
It will reduce that, and then it also is reducing the carbon footprint as well a little bit, right? Because you're putting a beneficial use to that you're converting that digester gas to CO2, right? So either way, we're going to have a CO2 emission, but if we're going to do it, we might as well provide a benefit to the community, right? So, and that's what stood out in this proposal versus FTO. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else, Dan?
That's it.
2.2 million.
We can just scrap it, and just, I'm sure.
So Scott, just, it's called the digestion project, but really it's not so much about the digesters. The digesters seem to be in pretty good shape. There's a discussion about some modifications to the floating lid cover on one of them.
Yeah.
It's really about the boilers. And I remember in our tour, that boiler room down kind of positioned between all the digesters and code compliance issues. And so it's really just, it's more of the heating and the boiler side. It's a boiler project. As much as it is really a digester. I know that most of the boiler heat goes towards the digestion process and is fired off the digester gas, but it's not. We're not building any new digesters. Possible modifications to one of the lids.
It's upgrades to the auxiliary system as well. So like the digester gas treatment system, in a sense, the current valving up there is not compliant, so that's another code requirement. And additionally to like sorry if I go into too much detail, I get excited about this, but the digester gas scrubbing system is original as well for H2S removal prior to burning digester gas in the boiler. So that has been requested by ops. It's become basically a huge maintenance and operational hazard to go up on the roof of the building and change out the media twice a year. So as part of putting in the boilers, we're going to be feeding them digester gas. We need to scrub that gas, so we're going to upgrade that system. We need to ensure for thermophilic operation of the current digesters that we upgrade the heat exchangers. So there's all these, without going into that whole list, auxiliary systems. So while we call it, it's more about the boilers than anything. That's the heart of the project. There's going to be quite a few substantial upgrades to other facilities and pieces to this as well.
I know that this proposal came on the heels of a fairly lengthy preliminary design report that was done. How much value did the preliminary design report provide in terms of this stage? Was that?
I think what the PDR did provide is it gave us a roadmap to understanding fundamentally the pieces that we needed to definitively provide for in this project, in a sense. Code compliance specific requirements. It was the validation that we can't move forward with replacing kind of boilers in the building for code compliance pieces. In the proposal, you're going to see there's a conceptual design package associated with about $300,000. That was the consultant's way to bridge the gap between PDR and going into final design. It's just not feasible to move right into a 30% design based off of PDR findings. So we needed that gap to be bridged. That's what the intent of that piece of this proposal and all three was to have that in the scope of work. But as a whole, it lays down a good foundation with data, but there were certain pieces we needed to finalize in the conceptual design before moving on.
And totally different question. I saw in some of the conceptual layouts a reference to HSW, like an SHW thing. What is the HSW?
So that would be hot water supply piping. So I believe if it was it a call out on a pipeline? Or
I think it was a building. I was wondering whether it was this kind of solid waste.
High strength waste.
So it's like the food waste facility and I've heard about this going to conferences that a lot of treatment plants to increase their methane output and also as a reduce, I guess, just methane loss through the landfills are bringing in food waste, restaurants and
We've been approached
places.
by multiple entities regarding food waste redirection to the plant. At this time, we don't have the facilities to accommodate that. If that's something the board would want to pursue looking into in the future, it's something that we want to make sure we leave space adjacent to the digesters for something like a co-digestion facility where you're basically blending your solids with food waste, or just an outright separate digester for food waste. There are concerns, and people do studies on this. It's still emerging, but you got to be careful when you introduce food waste into digesters so you don't upset them. So there's kind of some pilot studies I think we'd want to perform if that's something in the future we'd want to look into. For the sake of this project, it wasn't in the scope for budget purposes, but it's something that I think as there's more community pressure to redirect that food waste might be something we want to look into. But again, it's kind of who bears the cost of that, right, ultimately.
So it's not part of the project. It looked like it was in a conceptual plan, a whole HSW.
It's just planning for the
facility.
future tie-ins if we wanted
Okay.
to incorporate that, just so we don't paint ourselves into a corner per se, where we design this new boiler building, place it right where ideally we could do co-digestion. So boiler buildings can be located a little bit further away from the heart of the digester building, so we want to reserve that space for things like Class A biosolids in the future, so we have holding tank space. So that was the intent, I think, of the proposal. It's just
High-strength waste should be near your digesters because it is food waste, and pumping food waste long distances would be more expensive and more difficult. So leaving the high-strength waste facility near your digesters was part of our layout.
It's going to be a kind of dash line in the design for potential future, but not incorporation.
And the proposed boiler building is a floating placeholder for now, too. Please keep in mind. As we go through that finalization of the conceptual design, we'll have a permanent place for that boiler building identified. And that was something we needed to do as part of this finalization of the project as well.
And I think just timing-wise, I thought it was kind of cute. Did they say 3 more winners?
That was what their target was. Dan, the town of Truckee has requirements on soil disturbance, and so does TRPA. Technically, we're kind of in our own unique jurisdiction in the plant fence line where you can get variances from the water board for that. So the 3 winners target would be assuming we didn't want to do any soil disturbance, but historically we've gotten variances to do work over the winter, like BNR expansion back in 2003 was a variance that we were granted to do work over winter. So while we can target 3 winners, we can always pursue the work sooner.
Any thoughts on what happens to the existing boiler facility after it's no longer needed?
So a lot of the support equipment inside that building are going to have to remain. Like the heat exchangers are still staying in there. They have to be immediately adjacent. While they might get replaced, a lot of the hot water supply loops and return piping is all going to be located in there. So the building fundamentally is still going to have quite a lot of infrastructure in it. It's just specifically the boiler piece that's going to get pulled out. And then we have currently steam to hot water exchangers that convert that steam heat over to hot water. Those will get pulled. So some of the facilities will get removed as we convert over to a fully hot water supply and return loop only. But as a whole, a lot of that, like the sludge transfer piping and that equipment, the sludge mixing systems will be either upgraded or kept in place depending on the final recommendation. So the facility is still going to have a ton of infrastructure in it. It's just not going to be boilers specifically. So.
Okay. Any other director comments? Anything from staff, the consultant? No? By approving this, we're definitely going to be exceeding the reserves we saw earlier in our finance report, and so just, different topic, but we've got to prepare ourselves for finding the money. We're making commitments here to move forward on some pretty major capital projects. So at this point, I will entertain a motion to authorize the general manager to enter into an agreement with Brown and Caldwell on the final design of the digestion improvement project.
I so move. Oh.
I'll take the move by Wilson and seconded by Cox. Any other comments? We'll do roll call.
Director Wilson?
Yes.
Director Cox?
Yes.
Director Wilkins?
Yes.
Director Smelser?
Yes.
And Director Tresson?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Okay, staff, you guys got your work cut out for you.
To the big boys.
All right, on to other topics here. Item 6, discussion, staff direction regarding the CSDA call for support.
Getting to that one.
See you around.
On March 13th, we became aware California Special Districts Association had sent out a call for support in regards to the Surplus Land Act. They've been seeking public comment and looking for agencies to back them on this public comment. I included their sample letter, which touched on 4 specific areas of concern that they have with the newly drafted provisions of the law, being that we're looking at possibly surplusing land. It definitely could affect us. I discussed with Andrew, and Andrew, I'll let him speak to some of the challenges they've been experiencing with this as they've worked with surplus land acts. So I wanted to bring it to the board. My recommendation is that we do sign on in support of the special districts and their concerns with the newly drafted wording. Andrew, would you like to speak to some of the challenges that you guys have experienced with the Surplus Land Act?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Richard. So for context for the board, HCD, Housing and Community Development, is the state agency that is tasked with implementing the Surplus Lands Act. And as you may recall, we talked a little bit about the Surplus Lands Act in the context of the agency property discussion that you've been undergoing. My firm has quite a bit of experience working with HCD on implementation of the Surplus Lands Act for other clients. And in general, what we found is because the law, although not new, its implementation and application to special districts is new, HCD is still coming up to speed on implementation of the law. And one of the actions that they've taken is drafting these guidelines. They are not regulations. They are not the force of law. However, what we found is HCD adheres very closely to their own guidelines, although they do not have the force of law. And as pointed out in the CSDA letter, and consistent with what I have experienced in dealing with HCD, many of the guidelines are not just inconsistent with the law, but flat out contrary to the state statute. And that's caused a lot of issues in what should otherwise be a smooth process in working with HCD, both on exempt surplus land and non-exempt surplus land. So I see CSDA's effort to try to get HCD to pull back, to follow the state law and their guidelines as being beneficial to all my clients, but particularly beneficial to TTSA as you work on the property issues that we've been discussing generally. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. So you're looking for staff to authorize the general manager to submit this letter to CSDA and HCD?
Yeah, either myself as a general manager or yourself as the board president.
Okay. Yeah, I think just so long as the district is gives you authorization, I'd say we'll delegate that authorization to you, Richard.
That's good.
Unless you've already got something all written up, ready for my signature.
We don't.
Easier.
They do have an online version to give support. So with the authorization, I can just go in on the online and fill everything in.
So, is staff, this is just discussion. Staff direction is. We all comfortable directing Richard to submit that comment letter back to HCD on behalf of the agency?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
I think we have a consensus there. So,
just a question though on what this actually means is this reinforce like the first look at surplus land as housing?
I haven't totally dived into all of their guidelines because I don't know that all of them apply to us. Andrew might be able to speak to that. I did see that specifically in areas as it relates to First Go is for low-income housing.
Yeah.
Director Smelser, I'd be happy to speak to that. You're correct. That's the general purpose of the Surplus Lands Act. Make sure that there is a sort of right of first refusal for low-income housing. This letter doesn't touch on that core issue at all. It really only reaches the implementation of the act and the procedures that the agency needs to follow when it makes a decision about transferring property to another entity for any reason. It's really a procedural issue, and HCD's procedures are unfortunately not consistent with state law.
Okay, understood.
Okay, let's move on to item 7, the Placer County LAFCO ballot for a regular and alternate special district representation. I don't know if their staff had anything to say. You guys, LAFCO's looking for us to vote for this. They provided us, we got a whole list of candidates, so it says choose one.
So
for the regular and choose one for your alternate. And so I did notice, well, Dan, go ahead.
I was going to say that this came to the Tahoe City PUD board, and we voted for Josh Alpine, who I believe is currently he's Placer County Water Agency director, to be on the LAFCO seat. We voted for Judy Friedman, who's on the Tahoe City PUD board of directors, to be the alternate. So
I would go with those two.
I agree.
I liked it. Yeah, I read the letters that each of them submitted. I thought Gordon Ainsley's was particularly entertaining, but I really don't know these folks, and so the lean heavily on the recommendations of the other agencies, and so
I believe North Tahoe PUD was one of the agencies who also nominated Josh Alpine.
Okay. Yeah.
So I take that to be an assumption that North Tahoe PUD would be supportive of.
So let's tackle these just for the record.
I'm sorry, Blake, you can also choose an alternate second choice.
Yeah, it looks like for the regular one, it sounds like we have a motion to nominate Josh Alpine, or vote for Josh Alpine.
Yes.
Yes.
That was by Dan, seconded by, do we need motion item on this? It's not really agendized that way, but.
No.
It's okay. So the direction is, and it looks like it's me who's signing this, I'm going to vote for Josh Alpine for the regular seat, and under the alternate seat, our number one pick would be Judy Freeman, and we can pick a first choice and a second choice. I mean, we want to have Josh Alpine as our number two in case he isn't elected on the as the regular.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll do it. I will do that. And you guys have the paperwork for me?
Yeah, we'll get that printed out for you, and we can fill it out and sign it.
Okay.
Send it in.
Perfect. All right. That brings us to the end of the regular agenda and on to management team reports. Start with Michael.
Okay, thank you. Morning, Board of Directors. Mike Peak, Operations Department Manager. As far as for the Operations Department report for the month of February, all plant discharge requirements were met for the month. We do need to report that for the month that we 3 well static water levels were missed, and the monitoring and reporting program, we had a non-compliance, and we have reported that to Lahontan Water Quality Control Board. For the operations update, the plant performed well through the month. We have received response requesting more information from Lahontan Water Board pertaining to the WDR revision that we've requested. And then the other hot topic was the winter blizzard that we were shoveling out for days and days. If you go to the picture.
Hey, Mike, the static water levels, could you explain that a little more?
Yeah, so for our monitoring and reporting program, it calls out that we have to do static water levels in certain wells every month, some quarterly, some yearly. And for the month of February, 3 of those static well levels were overlooked. They just weren't taken, and so we don't have any documentation for those levels.
So it's not that there's some static well level that needs to be
they just
maintained,
didn't,
it just needs to be reported.
The requirement is just that they're leveled, they're measured and then reported, and we just didn't measure them. So it was just an error,
oversight
that we'll be correcting in the future, so we don't do that again.
Okay.
Anyway, this was the storm. This is primary number 2. And you can see with the damage from the weight of the snow actually did on the door, it actually bent that fiberglass door a little bit. But yeah, that's what we dealt with here at the plant March 1st.
Like Icebox Meadows.
Yeah, it was a good storm. Is there any other questions on the operations department report?
Thank you, Michael. Paul?
Good morning, Board.
Good morning.
All right, so for the month of February, maintenance staff provided support for the sodium hypochlorite project. We continue to work on that. You'll see some pictures upcoming here in the board packet. The SCADA IT master plan phase 1, we continue on with that. As you've heard from previous board meetings, warehouse inventory project, we are continuing on with that, and we've been working diligently to move that project forward, devoting quite a bit of overtime and things to getting that done. Lucity work order PM implementation continues, and we provided some feedback for the digestion improvements project and worked with engineering staff on that. So some of the notable plant maintenance activities is that we completed a TWAS pump and VFD installation. That got us away from an old technology and got us something a little bit better over there, a little bit more efficient and modern. Replaced some of the O2 basin, or one of the O2 basin probes. Continued on with some plant LED lighting upgrades. You'll see this pop up quite a bit throughout the year. We removed and capped some old carbon column effluent piping. That's for old infrastructure that accommodated some space for the sodium hypochlorite project. So that's out of the way. Lots of ongoing rodent damage we're experiencing throughout the plant, in our vehicles, in offices, warehouse. They're everywhere. We're getting overrun this year. So I don't know if it's because we've got a wet year or what's going on, but there's a lot of rodents. So.
Do you guys have a pest control consultant that comes out here? And
yeah, we currently contract with Clark's Pest Control. They're aware of it. They put additional traps out, but they don't seem to be able to handle the capacity, to be honest with you. I think there's just that many of them out there. So, but we're going to continue doing some more internally to supplement the Clark's effort. We repaired some warehouse roof leaks due to the storms, and we began installation of a new primary scum pump. If you recall from previous board meetings, we bought quite a few CBEX pumps, so we're into the installation phase of those pumps. So, and we got finalized the final effluent mag meter, and we completed that programming, so we're completely away from the old strap-on flow meter for the effluent monitor. So that's a big benefit for us.
was the warehouse re-roofed as part of our many roofing projects?
It was not.
Okay.
We're
next on the
patching
list
it as needed. Yeah, it's something we'd like to look at a little bit closer. But we'll be talking about that with engineering. So, one item of note is that we still do have 2 openings, one for IT and one for E&I. The E&I vacancy has been open for about 6 months. We made an offer this last month, which was rejected, unfortunately, due to cost of living concerns. So it is notable and timely that we're having the discussions. So we are continuing on with the recruitment process. IT. We are having difficulties finding qualified candidates for the position, so we're continuing on the process. All right. Got some pictures, I'm sure, coming up here. All right, we've got some in-house parts machining on the left. We do like to machine parts, keep up with our skill sets over there. That's one of our qualified persons for that. On the right, that's one of our new CPEX pumps that the board graciously provided for us. So thank you very much. Next pictures, please. Just another picture of the some of the instrumentation that's going into the sodium hypochlorite project. You'll see that we've added additional cabinets there for the PLC and some of the controls, also some of the level devices, and then underneath that sheet there is the main load center for all of the auxiliary systems that will be provided for that, whether it's lighting, instrumentation, and so on and so forth. On the right-hand side, we've got a gantry crane to install the filter press feed pump, which is the largest of the CPEX pumps that we purchased recently. And we've got some staff working on the warehouse tagging and warehouse inventory project, and a little bit better picture of the load center and main and transformer for that hypochlorite project. And another one of our CPEX pumps there. So that's for the TWAs there, and one of our staff members doing some work on that, wiring the motor up. I think that's it. Any questions?
Questions from the board? Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Good morning again, board. So in the engineering department, we have several projects in new phases this month. So sodium hypochlorite foundation project, concrete is done. It's been released. We've done our brake tests. It has met required strength. We are good to go. When I put this together, tanks were pending delivery. We have a delivery date. They will be here on Friday. Maintenance staff, operations staff are going to be working to get some water in them so that any storm we see over the weekend does not blow them away. So, but everything's going to be situated, and then we'll be able to officially hand off the project to maintenance to start doing some plumbing, and we'll have hypochlorite tanks relatively soon. So pretty excited about that. Big thanks to Scott Fleming for all his work on that. He did a lot of the CM work and did a lot of the design work on it, so I really appreciate that. Digestion improvements project, you guys got that lovely sticker shot there today. So we did recommend for RP to Brown and Caldwell. The TRI Alpine, which is the manhole 33 to 35, also very much appreciated for the approval on that. And then we have the front parking and landscaping improvements that is in design. We're pretty darn close to done. Our intent is to go public with a RFP for construction in April, hopefully early April. We're working through a lot of the permitting processes and all that stuff. So we're doing that entire project in-house except for the landscaping itself because we don't want to screw up sprinklers. So, but we're doing all the parking lot improvements and all of the foundation stuff ourselves. So, go ahead next. In the lab, we performed some research testing, which is pretty exciting for anyone that works in a wastewater lab because a lot of the work we do is very routine. So anytime you throw anything cool at people, they generally jump on it. So we did some research related to the methanol reduction that we were hoping to see realized out of the BNR through a return. So we have a whole ton of data that we need to suss through, and that's data that we're going to hand over to Carollo as part of the nutrient removal alternative study because side stream treatments are potentially a big part of that study. So special thanks to Bill Pindar. He, well, I'll show you some pictures here in a second. He jumped on that, set it up, and did a ton of nitrogen analyses. So we are still ongoing recruitment for the lab director. We had our interview. We had an interview yesterday. Similar to the situation we're seeing, that we had one external candidate, and we did not have a ton of interest in the position, so kind of unfortunate. And Michael was nice enough to jump on the sword here. The missed static loads was actually our department. We missed those. So we are in the process of doing the corrective action to ensure that we don't do that again. So, and that would be the pending corrective action you see down at the bottom there. Any questions? And there's Bill.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah. So we did some jar testing, very exciting stuff.
And don't forget your public outreach.
Oh, public outreach, correct. I'm sorry. We have a planned presentation at Alder Creek Middle School next week, collaboration with TSD and TDPUD. Greg and I are going to go over 2 days and do a presentation that kind of represents the entirety of the water cycle. Kids love it. So we're signing up for that. We've got a lot of upcoming stuff. We're going to be participating in Truckee Day. We're going to be participating in the Earth Day out in Alpine, and we're going to be potentially participating in a music festival in August at the park down the street. So I've got people are a little surprised. I said we're going to do this, and now we're really doing it. So a lot of people are really excited, though. So maybe someone will get an opportunity to listen to the concert while they represent.
Say they get free concert.
Yeah, it's free concert.
Yeah.
So, but Kaylee Oley, I'd like to just mention Kaylee Oley has done a ton of work getting materials and equipment and supplies and stuff, because we were kind of winging it in the past, and we had some equipment, but she has really upped our game. So a lot of logoized stuff. It looks really good. So I'm excited for that.
I'm back. Just when you thought you were done with me. Let's talk about what the finance and admin department did over the last month. Finance did their normal stuff. They paid people, they paid employees just as we expected them to. We posted journal entries, did bank reconciliations. There was a finance committee. We're still working on the final audit. It feels like it's dragging on forever. 100% it's with the auditors right now, so I will point that finger. Right before this meeting, we did ask where those draft statements are. Once we receive them, Michelle and I have to validate them. In a perfect world, we will turn them back around for April. I don't know if we live in that perfect world just yet, but that's our objective right now. I already told you I'm preparing a cash flow analysis that is ongoing. I will have some more to say about that at the April meeting. Purchasing. We bought some things. We processed some requisitions. Again, the purchasing agent sits at the front desk and greets folks as they come in. He makes sure I sign in every time I come in, so I'm authorized. I appreciate that. Billing and customer service, again, your revenue generator. Continue to work on the connection fee study. That is tied to the cash flow analysis, so I would like to have something to recommend to you all as part of the next presentation in April about what I think you should do for connection fee money. You can see some of the numbers here for fees as well as inspections that were done. We don't have any cool pictures, but I did write down for next month that we should develop something that you might want to see a picture. It might be us sitting at our desk, like scratching our head. I'm not sure, but we'll definitely work on that. Any questions? Thanks.
Will you be giving an update on the recruitment process?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Liz.
Okay. So we continue to work on leadership development, working on a schedule with the consultant that's pending. So it's in his court right now to get back to me on the start date. And now that the weather's starting to clear, we can get that going with his ability to come into town. Finance and admin manager, the recruitment continues. He has 2 candidates right now. Both of those are not from public agencies, not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. And 1 pending potential candidate who is from a public agency. So he's going to vet those out with more information to come here over the next couple of weeks. As Liz mentioned, she's been on site and working remote, working on cash flow analysis, so we can come back in April with a recommendation for the connection fee. I think I touched on this last month, but we did get our S&P bond rating renewal at a AA. Jason touched on the methanol reduction side stream pinch testing project, so we're still working on that to see if that is going to be a realistic approach. Continue to look at the master plan projects. With today's decisions, I think we have the next 3 to 10 years pretty much set for us. We will be reviewing the master plan, CIP projects, as well as the R&R projects that have been listed out over the years. As we start the budget process, to look at which ones are going to kind of get benched, which ones could be pushed out and put on hold until we get all that data back to make those decisions with. Working with legal on updating the leases for the 2 parcels that are affected in the land exchange. As soon as we get the finalized plot maps from the land surveyor, so they can pencil those into the lease agreements, we'll be processing those with TDPD as well as the school district. Dale, did you have a comment?
No comment.
Oh, okay. We did the TTSA, hosted the GM's meeting in February, continue to attend the revitalization steering committee meetings. Jason touched on the community involvement. We continue to recognize staff for their birthdays through February. Class and comp stuff was one. No update from the county DA on any kind of restitution from the Butterfield fire. Still waiting for that to all get finalized. We're starting the budget kickoff. First sheets went out this week. Interviews were discussed, and then we're working on getting all of our Form 700s to the appropriate staff here at the agency. Just to comment, I want to thank the board for approving the 3 projects. They're all big ones, a lot of money. It does set the direction for us over the next few years. My goal out of the digester improvement is to take a really good look at renewable resources as part of that project, which, whether it's co-digestion, heat recovery, I think it's time. We're in a very environmentally friendly area. We should be looking at these projects with that twist to it. I've reached out to Fuel Cell Energy and been engaged in some conversation, see if there's any possibility of interest on their part. So I'm dragging Jason in with me on all those as well.
Who's Fuel Cell Energy?
Fuel Cell Energy, they're a producer of fuel cells. So my previous employer, we had a fuel cell there. We were burning methane gas through to produce electricity. And the nice thing is they're very scalable. So you can do a very small unit, very low input from a digester gas point of view. Just a very clean energy, no emissions. They're actually transitioning now into where they can recapture the hydrogen that comes off to use for hydrogen-powered vehicles. So just one of those, get them out, talk to us, see what there is. There's a lot of, at least in Southern California, there's a lot of self-generation incentive program grant money. I don't know if that exists up here, but we won't know unless we look. So.
Great.
Hey, Richard, Jason mentioned the Truckee Music Fest as a opportunity for public education outreach. That's great. That's on our agenda for tomorrow night. That park where they're planning on doing it is a TSD property, and so I'm not sure what our outcome is going to be. But I know that the event organizers came and talked to you, and I'm just wondering what. It sounded like there was some use of TTSA property that was going to be made available for the music event. I'm just curious what that kind of commitment we're making to the.
No commitments made yet. They're interested in parking along the road. So I'm going to reach out to them as a follow-up. We were waiting for the snow to melt so we could evaluate in conversations with Dan. He made me aware of some new fire regulations that are coming for clearance space from road setbacks. So we're waiting for the snow to melt so we could evaluate how much of that would we have to do. Is it something that we leverage them to do if they want to use it to park and give them more parking? Also going to talk with Andrew as far as agreement. What would we put in place to try and prevent, put the onus on them to patrol any kind of camping overnight, those kind of things. And then I'm going to reach out for them and ask them for an in-writing request, or what do they want. They did come by and talk to us. It sounds like it's just parking, but I'd like to get it in writing, like how many cars, what do you want from TTSA,
Right.
so that I can share that with the board.
Okay. All right, thanks. I have a feeling that they may mention some relationship with TTSA when they address our board tomorrow. I'm just wondering what the nature of that was.
And in general, when we met, as far as the parking, I didn't express a concern with having a park as long as we had access. It's over the weekend, so we typically don't get deliveries. I did, suggest to them they might want to talk to Tykert and find out if Tykert's running trucks for any projects during that period of time, because that could get a little bit interesting.
Yeah.
So that was what I shared with them when we met.
Thank you. Anything else for Richard?
Yeah, I got a couple of them. Where do we stand on our surplus land?
Oh, thank you. I forgot to put that one on there. We actually are expecting the draft today, was what they've given me. I won't say promise, but that's what they were shooting for, was a draft of that today.
Okay. And then the other thing would, can you update us on the vehicles that we're looking to purchase and the arrival of the CATs?
Yeah, the two heavy equipment, the CAT, skid steer, and loader, I believe, are due for April, as of right now.
Yes.
As far as the vehicle purchases,
is making me dizzy.
Vehicle purchases, we looked into what the regulations are. Because we're a low population county, we wouldn't be required to implement that until 2027, I believe.
Okay.
But we are finalizing, because the initial bids that we got back were not very favorable. They didn't really account for us being a government agency, so I had asked Paul to look into government purchasing programs where there's kind of set pricing, and or piggyback with another agency that's already gone through and got a better favorable pricing than what was offered.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Richard? Thanks, Richard. We're on to any director comments. Dale?
Yeah, I got a couple of comments. First of all, I'm going to be making the sweep to the agency on Monday. Hopefully, Richard, you have time to meet and confer with me on some of the issues that haven't been on the agenda for my own personal clarity. And second of all, Blake, on that Monday, this is this coming Monday, hopefully you have time in your busy schedule to maybe fit me in for a few minutes for a one-on-one discussion on some of the items that were on today's agenda. If you don't have time, I'd like to be able to talk with you on the phone, just to be able to give you an idea of what my ideas are on where we're headed with this compensation and benefit study. So if you've got time, Blake,
okay.
I'm going to be at the agency maybe about 1 to 2 o'clock, anytime after 2. If you could fit me in for a brief discussion, I would really appreciate it.
I'll look at my schedule, Dale, and talk to you. We just need to be sensitive of Brown Act stuff, that we can't be meeting with anybody else talking about the direction you're headed. That would be a Brown Act violation. Andrew can probably back me up on that. We shouldn't be conferring amongst ourselves about the direction we want to go in private. That should be handled in public meetings.
That would be up. If it's 3 or more, my understanding, there's a Brown Act violation. But if it's just one-on-one, correct me if I'm wrong, Council, that I think that we could meet and confer.
My understanding of what President Tresson was saying is he wants to avoid a serial meeting on this, which I support as well. It's very, very important to be sure not to converse with more than 2 directors on any subject outside of a meeting. I would agree with that. Thank you.
And just to clarify, that doesn't mean 2 at the same time. You can't talk to me and then have a separate conversation with another board member, that becomes a Brown Act violation. It's a serial communication.
That's exactly correct, and that's why these matters are sensitive, and you should avoid communicating on these topics, and because of the risk of a serial meeting from one person talking to another and it continuing along in the chain.
So, Council, what you're recommending is that I don't need to confer with Blake.
Director Cox, no, my recommendation is just that you be very careful on these issues, that such discussions only be limited to 2 directors, and that can be difficult to do at times, but you should be very careful.
Okay, I understand that. Blake,
Thank you.
Are you clear? Are you clear with this?
Yeah.
Well, if you could fit me in for any kind of discussion, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll look at my schedule down and let you know.
Okay.
Anything else, Director, comments from you?
That's it for me.
Great. Thanks, Dale.
Good.
Scott's good. Dave?
Yeah, I was curious about the. Maybe you guys know more about this than I do, but I was told that during our great snowstorm, we had 50 plus gobblers available in the area, and only 6 were working.
50 plus what?
Gobblers, snow removal.
Oh, okay.
Snowblowers, yeah.
And I was wondering about what I was told, I have no inside information, is that most of the problems with the new electronic, the smog and stuff they're putting on the diesels, and the gobblers really vibrate. You heard anything of this?
So, talking snowblowers?
Yeah.
Yeah, the new snowblowers with the new emission
Emission
control.
stuff.
Yeah, that is an issue.
They're breaking out. So I was just wondering how that pertains to us and our equipment. If we end up getting a new hardware and stuff, do we have the facilities? One of the things that they told me is that they couldn't get technicians out to the snowblowers to fix them, and it doesn't take much to knock them out.
Yeah, I think in our case, the equipment we're getting, the skid steer doesn't have any real extras emissions on it. It's the way they tune it, the size of the engine, and some other items on it. So not the same horsepower as those snowblowers are. Same way with the loader. So I think this initial purchase, as more stringent requirements come out to where we're forced to get hybrids or electric equipment, we'll be faced with how do we maintain those, because it's not going to be worth it to us to have a technician that specializes at that level.
Right.
And even with the equipment we have now, we're looking at this budget cycle of really assessing. The dump truck we have is old emissions technology. The Gap Vac, our Vector truck, is newer, so it uses the DEF fluid on it. But because we use it here in the plant, that's really hard on it because we don't get it out on the road and really load it down. So we are aware of those issues, and we're addressing them as they come up, and how best to select equipment that meets the environmental stewardship that we're called for, while still being able to be reliable and there when we need it.
And there's no retroactive regulations that require you in 27 to say upgrade?
They start they do have requirements where they phase out. That was the main driver for us buying a new skid steer and the new loader, is because we're going to get where we have to get rid of those by the phase outs. Being in a, like I said, it applies kind of in the vehicles that we're looking for. Being in a low population county, we don't have to buy an electric car yet. Come 2027, we will. So that gives us some time. We don't even have the infrastructure to charge electric cars, so it gives us some time to gear up for that. But it is on the horizon.
Anything else, Dave?
That was all I had. Yeah.
First time I've heard that snowblowers referred to as gobblers.
Yeah. Dan?
No.
And, nothing for me. A big board meeting. Thanks for getting all that stuff in front of us, and thanks staff. And yeah, glad to be moving into springtime.
We call them gobblers because of the number of cars that you.
With nothing else, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Boom, meeting adjourned.